Can everyone hear me, Alan?
That's better.
That's better. Still,
That's better.
still a little weak, but it's better.
Is this even better? A little bit better now?
Yeah.
I think if other people also mute, they're not talking, that would be helpful for audio quality for the person who has the floor as well.
Yeah, Carey, I think we can actually mute everybody when we get going too.
Yeah, and I think to start, we might just want to go over some protocol procedure for the online meeting.
This is Maggie Summer. If anyone has GoToMeeting specific tips on the webcam, I'd take them. Mine works fine with other applications, but it's telling me I don't have a webcam available now, although I can see myself.
Maggie, are you using, when you joined, did you choose to use the web-based option or use the app option?
Web-based.
It could be, the experience I've had in the past is that the browser you're using hasn't had permission to use your webcam. I'm not sure how to actually allow the browser. So that might be the problem.
Great, thanks.
I think if you search video, it'll take you to an option where you can associate the video to the GoToMeeting. I had to do that from my microphone.
Great, thanks.
What do you think, Adam and Carey? It looks like we have 31 attendees. It hasn't increased for a little while. I know Angel is going to be a little bit late. She had another call this morning.
Yeah, I think it's probably best we get going. I was waiting for, because I thought there was going to be a few commissioners joining, but they may be on a schedule, so we can get going with what we've got now.
Okay, this is Per. Should we shut off our webcams unless we want to say something? Is that the deal?
Yeah, well, I think we'll go through some of those protocols now. So leave it on or turn it off for the time being. We'll get started. What I will do is mute everybody though while we get started. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. It's really nice to see a number of you and hear folks. I hope everybody is keeping well. And I'm glad to see that people have been able to make this virtual meeting work so far. I think, maybe Alan can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first virtual meeting of the Commission or any of its subsidiary bodies since we've found ourselves in this current situation. So there may be a few hiccups along the way, but I really appreciate everyone's willingness to I guess be the guinea pigs the first go around. Hopefully folks can see the agenda on the shared screen. It's document 01. Before we get into the full agenda though, Carey and Alan and I had talked about trying to identify a few tips or suggestions about how we can best work in the GoToMeeting platform. So as most folks have seen, there is a floating menu bar that has your audio, visual, and screen controls. There's also a chat function and a list of the attendees. I think most folks had a chance to experiment with those features on Thursday, or if you've used GoToMeeting in previous sessions. The chat function is something that you can use both to talk to the entire group or individuals. And so obviously you can use that as the meeting goes on, but just be mindful about who you're chatting to, because I think the default is to continue either talking to, always talking to whoever you spoke to last. So it's going to be, at least I know for me, a bit of a struggle to deal with all the multiple things that are popping up. If it's too much, you can just minimize all those options or turn them off. The substantive parts of the meeting, of the session, are going to happen here with the audio recording and the video. We're not going to be making decisions on the chat bar on the side. One suggestion that we had put forward was that the webcams would be turned off when we're not speaking. So the only webcams would be left on would be the co-chairs and the secretariat. The idea then was that it would help minimize any bandwidth issues. Although that said, I haven't noticed anything yet. So maybe turn it over to the floor, or Carey or Alan first, to see if there's any thoughts about this webcam protocol. The suggestion was we turn it off until you want to speak, and you turn your webcam on, and that would be a good way for us to know that you want to be added to the queue.
I think that's a good idea. Some may not have a webcam or it may not be working, so feel free to use the chat window as well. I'm monitoring that on the second computer. And if you have something to say in the webcam and the chat's not working for you, just feel free to unmute and speak up, and we'll put you in the queue. And I think Adam and Carey, you'll keep a running list of whoever would like to speak.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So first step is to indicate your desire to speak by turning on your webcam, and hopefully there isn't too much of a queue, and you could actually just start talking when your webcam's on. If your webcam is not functioning, then you can indicate in the chat that there's a question you'd like to be added to the list. Okay. Carey, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
I think that's all. Yeah, I think that'll be a good plan. And if we're going along and there's something about that plan that doesn't work, then we can make adjustments then.
Okay, sounds good. I guess the other piece is, does anybody have any secret tips or things you found has worked well on this type of platform? Anything you want to share in a soundbite?
I think
I would just say I've heard in the Zoom context that while you're chatting with people, say individually or sometimes with the group, I've heard that entire record is recorded and disclosable. So I'm just putting that out there for people. If you want to chat really privately, you probably want to use a text, phone text. If that's the case, maybe this platform doesn't keep a record.
Well, that's a good point. I actually should look to clarify with the Secretariat about how this session's being recorded. Normally, these meetings are recorded for posterity, but I'm not sure what parts of this session are being recorded. If we were in the IPHC's office, you could step out in the hall to have a side conversation, but that's obviously not possible here. I believe everything is currently being recorded. I don't think the chat functions are saved. I don't know if Alan or Dave could clarify that.
I know that all the GoToMeeting itself is being recorded, so I know the audio is being recorded. I'm not sure if the video is well, but well, actually the screen sharing is definitely being recorded. I'm not certain about the chat window, but I think that you can assume that everything that goes in the chat window is on the public record.
Okay. All right, thanks for that point, that clarification, Alan, and that tip, Jim. One thing I will add is if you do have a separate audio, a headpiece and a microphone, I've heard that the sound is better that way. For me, I use it because my 3 children are currently practicing karate and piano, I think at the same time, right above me. So this keeps it a little bit quieter. I don't think we should have too much of an issue with background noise because we can mute everybody. But if we're having trouble hearing someone speak, that's a suggestion. Okay. Any other points? Otherwise, I suggest that we move into the second agenda item, adoption of the agenda and any of the arrangements that we need to identify for the session. So this is actually probably a more substantive discussion than what we've had in past MSAB meetings, in that obviously the agenda is needed quite a bit of modification given the current circumstances. So as folks have noted, while the high-level content of the agenda is still the same as what was posted before we elected to move to a virtual meeting, the amount of time dedicated to individual items has been cut back, so that the sessions roughly are broken into a half day, a morning of presentations, and then unscheduled or undefined amount of time in the afternoon where folks could have more informal discussions before we come back to report writing at the close of the day. Alan, perhaps, well, I should have shared my screen. Perhaps you could go to today's timetable as a first example. Thanks. So you can see that we're scheduled until about midday with presentations. The afternoon, if Alan scrolls down a little bit further, is where you see there's the unscheduled time, and we'll circle back for report writing. So we do have some extended time for a break. To be honest, I'm not clear about how best we make use of that break time or how we might have these informal conversations. At least in my experience over the past few years with the MSAB, some of the most constructive time is usually when we're talking during lunch break or coffee break, and there isn't a single platform that I've identified that would help facilitate those conversations. So if folks have any ideas, please share them. It'll probably be something that's going to continue to evolve throughout the week. So what are folks' thoughts on the agenda? Are there things that we really need to change? Are there points of clarification that folks want to seek?
I would agree with you, Adam, that that 2-hour break in the afternoon was specifically for people to collect their thoughts, to have side conversations. I'm not sure how the Secretariat can assist in those conversations. I believe this go-to meeting will remain open, but as I said, that is being recorded and anybody can join that, even the public members. And so, you know, I encourage people to have those conversations. I'll definitely be available on the phone, email, etc. And yeah, but if anybody does have a suggestion for what they would like to see for the day and how the day works, please let us know.
Hey, Adam, this is Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, I just had a question on like, what is the major outcome of this meeting? Because I noticed that if we're trying to basically review the results of the management procedures we identified back in October and firm those up for further work for this October, it seems most of that was just like an hour or two on Wednesday or Thursday. And I'm just wondering if that's still the main outcome, or could you guys kind of recap where we are in the process and what you'd like us to get done at this meeting?
Yeah, I can do that, Dan. Thanks for bringing that up, and I thought that would be a useful discussion to have while we're sort of setting out this agenda, is that the MSE team has been working very, very hard, and we're really, really close to having the simulations going into production mode. However, we felt that at this time we do not have results that are meaningful and that would be useful to analyze at this meeting. So we're not going to have any real results of those actual management procedures to discuss and refine. So this meeting is going to have to focus on where we currently are at with the simulation modeling, the things that we have been doing to ensure you that the simulation modeling will be accurate and useful for this exercise in the coming year. and then to have a discussion, a longer discussion on those management procedures, make sure that we have the set of management procedures that the MSAB would like to see go forward, and then talk about the schedule for the remainder of the year, and mainly how the SRB is going to fit in, and when results will be available and how you'd like to review those results, if that's in October, the first time you want to see those, or if we have a release sometime in the summer, perhaps, of some preliminary results.
And just to clarify, I appreciate the modified schedule. And I appreciate the idea that we want to look at that list that you laid out in the table and in our 07 document and make sure that's what we really want to go forward. Have you run those exact scenarios, or, you know, and if we were to change them, would we have wasted some work that's already happened, or where are we at in terms of the ability to kind of modify those?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. That's a really good question. No, I'd say that there's no time wasted. Everything that we have done thus far, the MSD team has written a lot of code to perform those exact management procedures. So we have that written in code. It was just bringing the whole thing together, have operating models that are working, connecting with those management procedures and producing the right results. There's a lot of little moving parts to this that we just didn't have all the pieces fitting together exactly. So if those were to change, it would be simple changes to our code. There would be nothing wasted, and we haven't actually done the real long simulations at this point in time. So there wouldn't be any waste in changing those or tweaking those slightly. But I would say within the next month, and we're hoping to bring some results to the SRB meeting in June, that will be running these longer simulations and starting to see how these distribution procedures are coming together. So this is an
thanks. That's really
time.
helpful.
Yeah, this is an opportune time to start, to think about those again and tweak those a little bit. And I do apologize that we won't have the results to look at this time.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thanks, Dan. So I see Peggy's got a question, and Jim. Tom also had a comment in the chat, and I'd like to interject that because it's a follow-up for Dan, I think. So just understanding what the sequence of events is in terms of our timing requirements. Tom is concerned that the SRB is expecting final results in September 2020. And so how do we align our recommendations with what the SRB needs to provide some input on going forward from there? So Alan, do you want to take the SRB piece afterwards? Like, do you hear questions from other folks, or do you have an answer for that now?
The short answer is, and then we can follow up with that after we hear from folks, is that the MS team is very aware, and our timeline is to get those results by the end of August for that initial look by the SRB. But of course, things can change after that. And then we have to fit in the MSE review as well in there. So we're looking to have our production runs pretty much, preliminary runs done in August for those 2 reviews at the end of August.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Peggy?
Thank you. Yeah, I had the same thoughts that Dan did about what the purpose of this meeting would be, and for a couple of reasons. I'd like to know if we need to have a summer meeting, and I'm more than happy to do a summer meeting, but I hope it would be productive. And now it sounds like a meeting prior to September may not be as productive, and since we're meeting in October. So if you have thoughts on that, if I've got the timing wrong, that would be good to hear from you, Adam or Alan or Carey. And then for this meeting, I was thinking about those kind of ad hoc conversations that we have. And if we do it according to the agenda, it would be important to be able to capture any productive results of those in that day or shortly in the next morning's recap, to get it on the record. Because for agenda items that are coming up, we can do that when we come to that agenda item. But if it's for something that we've been discussing, and then we sort of clarify our thoughts after we've moved on to the next agenda item, somehow it seems like we need to be able to recognize some progress, or at least bring something up to discuss, so that it may change the outcome. That's all I'm thinking.
That's a really good suggestion, Peggy. And if you got some suggestions about how best we can accommodate that, I'm all ears. Two things that we had talked about, which may get us partway there, is first flagging a check-in before and after each break, so that everyone has a chance to talk about what their sidebar conversations were in that time. But the other piece was having some more dedicated time to each individual, similar to when we went around the room after talking about objectives and management procedures and asked every person to speak. So put another way, rather than the co-chair saying, does anyone have any comments or questions, we would say, Peggy, what do you have to add? Chris, what do you have to add? Dan, what do you have to add? And giving every member a specific opportunity to speak.
That works. I think we'll.
It also puts folks on notice. Be prepared to talk.
Yeah. Let's see how that works as we go through.
Like I said earlier, this is my first time doing this, and I think for a lot of other folks. So I will greedily accept any recommendations or suggestions folks have about how to do things differently if there's a better way. I see Chris identified he'd want to speak, and I think Jim Lane had also turned on his webcam. Jim, would you mind going, and then Chris? Or Jim may be turning on unintentionally because I only see your knees. Chris, would you mind going then?
Chris needs to be unmuted.
I don't see Chris's webcam. Do you all see Chris's webcam?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
I can hear you, Chris.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, so go ahead, Jim. I think Jim can go first.
Jim's still muted. Jim, I'm going to unmute you. Well, I've unmuted Jim. Jim, can you talk now? Jim Lane?
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you, Jim.
All right. Sorry for that. So just to clarify in my own mind, I was because you're not expecting any real results till later on. So to me, this is kind of more of a being able to go over maybe a little more detail those very technical papers, kind of like information from the Secretariat about a lot of this stuff. And I kind of like Peggy's suggestion at some point later, after we've been able to maybe think about it, because I find these long webinars as well, they may be kind of things we have to do now. They are kind of challenging to sort of get your head together around a lot of stuff. On that note, I am a member of a worldwide organization that is lobbying for the ban of webinars longer than 4 hours. Anyways, I like that suggestion, and sometime later, maybe in June, we can reconvene, or at some point in time where we can kind of maybe think a little bit more about what you're saying. Certainly, I think we're going to have some questions and stuff, but some of a couple of those papers are really technical. We don't without results to look at, but I did appreciate you kind of scoping down some of the management procedures. That does help your brain kind of balance some stuff, and maybe I think you're going to do this, but being able to sort of provide the rationale for kind of how you did that. I think you did that back in October, I think, to a certain extent. So when I saw them, I thought, okay, this is what he's done, and it started to make sense to me even without seeing it. But thanks for that. So I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Jim. So I see Chris has also got some questions, and then maybe we'll wrap it up from there. Actually, maybe Chris go first, and then I'll provide a summary.
My comment was just sort of similar to what Jim was saying, just in that I'm still a little confused on what the process is going to be going forward. And you know, we talked about information's got to go to SRB. Obviously, we want to have some input before we get final results or even results. So I think the suggestion earlier is something we all need to keep in mind. You know, we're going to get a lot of information this meeting. We probably should, in our mind, be preparing and think about it and propose some times that we may have to get together at some point in the summer if we want to be able to look at this and provide insight. So I'm just throwing that out there for the group that it's something I think we need to keep in mind.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so we've heard a few similar points from folks around the room, and it's good to hear that folks are on the same page by and large, and that we're thinking probably about similar solutions. So the 3 points I've got scribbled down here is affirming what some of the key deliverables are, the key takeaways from this meeting. And then given that those deliverables may not be the same as what we had anticipated delivering at MSAB015 when the work plan was put together previously, do we need to revise the work plan and perhaps identify some intersessional meeting before October 2020 to either provide more advice to the Secretariat in advance of SRB, or for us to have an opportunity to provide some comment after digesting the quite technical papers that were put forward for this meeting. So I guess the question is, if folks are in agreement that we need to do that, we need to identify what the key deliverables are, we need to revise the work plan, and then identify some meeting before October 2020. Do we do that during the dedicated program of work agenda item, which is currently scheduled for Thursday, or do we need to have something a bit sooner? I would suggest that we do it at the later in the meeting, so that we actually have a chance to see what's coming down the line on today, tomorrow, maybe Wednesday. But if folks feel like that's waiting a bit too long, maybe we could have some of these informal discussions in one of the breaks in the afternoon, and people could share their thoughts about when best to meet again, to probably tomorrow morning. I'm thinking folks probably some folks will know, July is not going to work because I'm fishing, or already have obligations in June or something like that. So what are folks' thoughts on that? Or actually, maybe I should go first to Alan. Like, what is the Secretariat schedule in terms of when you're actually able to meet?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. First off, I think holding off to have this more detailed discussion until that agenda item of the program of work might be helpful. That way we see everything that's currently up to point, or what's been done up to this point, and where the MSC team and the Secretariat think that we're going to end up and when we're going to end up there. And then furthermore, I just want to note that having meetings does take away time for us, and the prep for this MSAB meeting, is weeks of time. The prep for the intersessional commission meeting was a week of time, the annual meeting. It takes time that distracts from us getting the work done in the simulations. So I think July might be a little bit early to begin thinking about this, but in August sometime would be ideal from our viewpoint, to be able to have some results done and some summaries of those results in some format. And I'm not sure the best format for that meeting. If we're to create formal documents for this meeting that are lengthy and have worked out graphics and all these tables and things, that's going to take a lot of time. If we're just to put together a more informal intersessional meeting, perhaps, and Dave, feel free to chime in on this as well, that it might allow us to continue our workflow, be able to provide an update to the MSAB, and then that gets captured in some sort of minutes in some way that then moves forward to the SRB and the commission.
Yeah, if I could chime in there, I would suggest that we run it very similar to how we run intersessional meetings of the commission itself. That process is now well defined, and if there are specific needs for the MSAB to prepare both for or to deliver for the SRB meeting and then also for the October MSAB meeting, I'd suggest that it would be a simple one paper with key deliverables or items that the MSAB would need to provide guidance on for Alan and the team. And then, as Alan has said, those MSAB intercessional guidance or requests for action would be both passed to the SRB and then also the MSAB. And so it would really just be essentially a 1 or 2 page summary of an intercessional meeting. It would still be formal, but it wouldn't have the same, let's call it, padding as we do with other subsidiary body meetings. It would just be a single paper that Alan would need very clear direction or guidance from the MSAB on, and that could be relatively short and simple in its nature.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay.
Could everyone hear Dave? Great.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I suspect we will need to dedicate a bit more time to this discussion about what any subsequent meetings will look like. From the little bits that I've heard talking to folks, the concern mostly is that we don't want to be getting to October, the final meeting before presenting very significant results to the Secretariat or to the commissioners, and have that as the one shot to provide that. So I suspect the conversations will be strongly influenced by what comes out of this week's papers. Okay, I see we're a little bit behind time, although I don't know if that's going to be, time has lost all meaning over the past little while, so I don't know if that actually means anything at all. Sorry, Alan, you had a question?
If we're going to move off the agenda, I just want to ask one more question about the process for this meeting. Is that the presentations, I doubt, are going to take 3 or 4 hours. It depends on the discussion always, and I'm always pleased with how much discussion we have at MSAB meetings. But, I'm wondering if right now the agenda is organized to have one paper each of the day. There's 4 papers, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Each paper is presented on each day. And we might just want to consider if we want to jump ahead in the agenda, or if we want to cut off each day and maintain that 4-day meeting, or if we want to actually see how quick we can get through this meeting and potentially shorten it. I'll leave that up to everybody else, but I'm here for 4 days.
Shorter is better.
Shorter is better. I've heard that from a few folks. I guess the one consideration, Alan, for yourself is if we were really motoring through things, are you ready on Tuesday morning to present Thursday afternoon material?
Yeah. All of the presentations are actually posted online already. And unless there's specific requests from people, we're ready to go.
Okay.
I don't know that we'll be doing Tuesday.
I don't know if there's anything for observers that we're specifically looking on attending different days. I'm not as concerned about observers, more about meeting attendees. Like, I don't know if folks here have said to your constituents, hey, you should really listen in on Wednesday because that's going to be really important for your specific interests.
Yeah, and I'm happy to accommodate however is needed.
Yeah. So is anyone in that situation where the delivery of a specific paper on a certain day is important? Okay, not hearing anything. I think we can probably plan to move through things a little bit faster. I'll also say to folks, I will attempt to pause longer in between questions. Usually it's good to leave a few seconds to let someone think. I find you also need to provide a few more seconds to allow people to find the unmute button in webinars. So there might be a longer awkward pause right now as we let people navigate the technology. Okay, Peggy, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thanks. I feel like I'm raising my hand, so maybe I should just speak up. But thank you, Alan. That's what I wanted to say is all of this, I think, is good. I would be in favor of taking this meeting as it comes and deciding whether we feel like we've gotten the information and we can move forward quicker than the agenda calls for. I do not have any of our members waiting for Thursday or Wednesday to check in. At least they haven't notified me that that's what they want to do. But I think it's too early for me to say, yeah, I'm all for a quicker meeting, because I missed October and I'm not sure how quickly I'm going to be able to catch up. So I'm happy to do it, and I'll let you know if I need more time, but I can't really say that right yet.
Okay. Well, that's helpful, Peggy. Thank you. Okay, so I think the takeaways from this is that we will move forward with the agenda as it was posted in terms of the contents, but we may move through things a little bit faster. So it sounds like folks are comfortable with that, and I suggest we move on to the next agenda item, which is 3.1, MSAB membership. Now, Dr. Wilson was going to speak to a few points in paper 03, but before we do that, I would really like a co-chair. So Carey is very capable, but officially her term expired yesterday. And so she has a slim opportunity of escaping now, but I'd like to open up the floor for discussion amongst MSAB members, particularly around seeking a nomination for co-chair. I would point out Carey is a very competent co-chair, and I would be selfishly very happy if she continued to be co-chair. But yes, as per the rules of procedure, there's defined terms for the co-chairs, and so if anyone's interested in stepping up or putting forward a name, now is your opportunity. That's also why Carey has been quiet the past little bit, I think, right, Carey?
I would nominate Carey if she's willing to continue on for one more term. I would nominate her that she continue on as co-chair.
Thank you very much, Dan. You did it. It's a beat there.
I'll second Dan's nomination if Carey's willing.
Thanks very much. All right, so there's a call for Carey and a second as well for Carey. Any other nominations?
Tom Marking just noted in the chat his support for Carey.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, and I forgot to mention, I think it's a 2-year term. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, that's correct.
Perfect. Okay, then it sounds like quite a bit of support for Carey. Any objections?
No, I have no objections, but I do have a question. Carey, are you willing to serve another 2 years, please?
Yes, I'm willing to if people would like for me to.
Thank you, Peggy. I was hoping to avoid that question. I didn't want to give too much choice, but I think that's probably necessary and appropriate. Okay, well, Carey, thank you for not objecting. One last call for anybody else for co-chair. I'm not hearing any. I think we can say that appointment is made and pass it along to, I guess, Dave, do we pass it on to the commission or the secretariat to formalize?
Yeah, so all we do is we just pass that to the commissioners, and they will, as for the other subsidiary bodies, probably just note it into the record at the interim meeting. Carey has already provided a letter of potential perceived conflicts of interest, and so we just pass that along with it as well. Carey, if there is any other addendum or modifications to that, just let me know. If not, I'm getting a head shake, so that's perfect. That's all we need. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Dave. And most importantly, thank you very much, Carey. I think the MSAB is very fortunate to have someone like yourself here helping us through close to the end of been a pretty long journey. So we've got some pretty big decisions to make, and I really appreciate having you here.
Well, thank you, Adam, for guiding us through that process, and to all of you for supporting me as co-chair, I suppose. I'm happy to do this, and I think it'll be exciting in the next year to see where the MSAB goes with regard to recommendations and seeing these results of the spatial model. So it's an exciting time here.
Good news. Okay, so with the appointment piece resolved, I think we can turn it over to Dave to identify any other membership pieces in paper 03.
Yeah, thanks, Adam and Carey. So this paper 03 was dated back the 10th of April of last year. Sorry, this year. Yes, time really has lost all meaning here, I have to say. And since the last MSAB meeting, we've had three specific changes to the membership. We have Sarah Webster, who's been attending most of the meetings over the last couple of years anyway, replaced Jim Hasbrook from ADF and G. We also had Maggie Summer, who's joined us as one of the Fisheries Management Council representatives from the Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and she was appointed last month. And then also we have Mr. Angus Grout, who is a new member to the MSAB, representing the Canadian commercial harvesters. And so welcome Angus in particular, and Maggie, who I don't recall, Maggie, if you've actually attended any of the MSAB meetings prior either. But Chair, if we may, maybe we could pass to those new members just to give a little bit of background about their interest in the MSAB, and yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, great suggestion. Thanks very much. Actually, I haven't heard from Angus, but maybe Maggie, would you mind going first and just giving the group a brief introduction? Turn on your webcam, say hi to everyone if you don't mind.
Sure, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I would love to turn my webcam on, but still have not been able to get it working with GoToMeeting. So I will try to resolve that. But here's an audio introduction in the interim. I am with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm our Marine Fisheries Management Program Leader. I represent ODFW on the Pacific Fishery Management Council. I have been attending the IPHC interim and annual meetings for about 5 years, but I have not yet attended a Management Strategy Advisory Board meeting, although I have been doing quite a bit of reading in the past several months to get up to speed on this with some of the background documents and the materials for this meeting.
Thank you, Maggie.
Yep.
Thanks very much, and welcome.
Yeah, Adam, you think that Angus is not on?
I think he's on. I just didn't actually hear him speak yet, but I'm here. Hey, Angus. Would you mind providing an introduction to the group?
Yeah, hi, I'm Angus Grout, and yeah, thank you for having me on. I've been a commercial halibut fisherman for the last 25 years. I've sat on the conference board for the last, oh goodness, 10 or 12 years, as well as I'm an alternate for the Halibut Advisory Board and the Pacific Halibut Management Association, and I've followed the MSAB process with interest, although I confess I've got a lot of catching up to do, so I'll probably be doing a lot more listening than talking, but please bear with me while I try and catch up.
Thanks very much, Angus, and welcome. I particularly appreciate folks like yourself who don't go to meetings for their regular day job. It's a lot to ask of folks to come and participate in this session, so thank you for providing your very valuable time.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else, Dave, to flag in the membership piece?
Pretty clean, thanks.
Right.
Well, if I may just note, Adam and Carey, I believe Rachel Baker's online. She was nominated before MSAB015, but was on, I don't think she was able to attend MSAB015, but she's back. A longtime member that took a short pause and is now back with us.
Yes, that's right. Her appointment came through, I think, partway through the October meeting. And actually, there's a number of new faces that weren't around when Rachel was here. So maybe, Rachel, would you mind giving a brief introduction as well?
Yeah, also Rachel's here in a new capacity, so.
Yes, of course, right. There you go.
Oh, muted.
Oh, just wait.
I can help with that. I'll unmute her. Are you there, Rachel?
And Alan.
There you go.
What's that?
You're good now. I just unmuted you, Rachel.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you. Nice to see everyone and hear everyone. Rachel Baker with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Currently working primarily on federal state management issues, much like Maggie's position for the state of Alaska. And I did participate in the Management Strategy Advisory Board for several years as a NOAA Fisheries employee. So familiar with this group and look forward to joining here at the end. I missed the most exciting part. You guys made a lot of progress while I was gone, and so maybe my leaving helped that progress. I don't know, but I'm back anyway. So nice to see everyone.
Nice to see you, Rachel, again too. And I disagree that we made progress in your because of your absence. Maybe more exciting parts are still to come too. But really nice to have you back. Okay, well, maybe we can wrap up the membership piece there and briefly go to the next agenda item, which is 3.2, updates from the October session. And I don't know, actually, Alan, maybe we could even just wrap these all up, 3.2 to 3.4 in one go. Defer to you about what the best process is.
They're all separate documents, but I can just walk through them and just give the highlights and take any questions as we go.
Yeah, okay. It's more just I'm not going to interject. I don't know, Carey, unless there's anything else you want to flag on a specific paper.
Yeah. Okay, so this will be then documents 4, 5, and 6.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm sorry, I keep looking over here. I'm sort of monitoring what we're seeing on my laptop, just make sure everything's going well. So you're probably getting a lot of side profiles of me. So as many of you remember, you were at the MSAB015, which is a really good, productive meeting. And this document 04 just notes a few things. I'll just walk through a few of the deliverables and the recommendations that came out of MSAB014. So Coastwide fishery objective is what was recommended, and that was this target reference point of a relative spawning biomass of 36%, at least 50% of the time. As a reminder, this was an objective that was added to our long list of objectives. That, of course, has been completed, and I'll summarize what happened at the intersessional meeting in, I think it was February of 2020. With regard to the commission on that aspect. A whole table of goals and objectives related to distributing the TCUI as well as coastwide goals and objectives was identified in the appendix of the report from MSAB014, and that was passed to the commission at the intersessional meeting in February, which was subsequently approved, and I'll go over those details of that intersessional meeting shortly. We had, noting the current progress on the coastwide MSE portion, the MSAB had recommended a couple of points, being the SPR 43%, 30-20 control rule, and some type of constraint, as well as a range of management procedures, in that noting that an SPR between about 40 and 46% would likely meet the objectives that are defined. And these are on the coastwide level again, noting again that at the intersessional meeting that the commission took up in February, that there was a recommendation coming out of that acknowledged this recommendation from the MSAB. So again, we'll go over that intersessional meeting shortly. And please interject. What I see on this big screen is just the document, which is why I keep turning, but if anybody has a comment, just please interject and interrupt me. The next recommendation was related to this year and the work plan that we're doing this year, and this is the management procedures for a coastwide scale, identifying a range of procedures. Yeah, Chuck has a question I just saw.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Go ahead. Yeah. I see you're unmuted, Chuck, but I'm not hearing anything.
Very interesting.
There you go, Chuck. Now I hear you. We did. Is there perhaps a mute on your computer? It shows the GoToMeeting showing that you're unmuted, Chuck, but perhaps there's a mute on your actual microphone. You're coming. I see that it's indicating you can talk, Chuck. Can you give us a test? How about we come back? Chuck, keep trying. I'll move forward on this, and we can take a question on constraints at any time. And it might relate more to the intersessional meeting anyway. So if you could try to debug. It was working earlier, Chuck, so I'm not sure what's going on. I'll just leave you unmuted for now. So this recommendation was the range of SPR values for us to evaluate in 2020, and that is a range of SPR values along with some identification of various constraints, including a combination of constraints. For example, combining a slow up, fast down with a 15% annual maximum constraint. So we're putting together that sort of design of management procedures. A long list of management procedures related to distributing the TCY supplied, and as a reminder, in the report from MSAB015, there were 2 tables. One table was a longer table with basically a lot of ideas. The second table was a short list that we were to bring to this MSAB015 meeting, and we will be working on as quick as we can. A request that the SRB make a comment on these paragraphs from their SRB 15 report. That is, of course, in progress, as we have not had an SRB meeting yet. Chuck, I can hear some moving around, perhaps. Are you able to speak?
I'm not sure I'm able.
There. Yeah, I can hear.
Okay, I'll mute myself and wait.
Okay, thanks. After, I think we're almost done with this, and then we can take your question. So again, this is in progress as the SRB will be meeting in June, and we'll make sure to bring this request to the SRB and gain further clarification on their comments. With that, I believe that's the, oh no, there is a little bit more. The MSAB wanted to record a number of elements that would be included in the distributing the TCY. This is actually something that's really useful to review, to remember what we talked about at MSAB 14, talking about coastwide constraints, different harvest rates across the regulatory area biological regions. Those are relative harvest rates. The concept of distributing the TCY directly to a regulatory area from coastwide or going through regions to do that. Fixed shares concepts. And then this concept of a maximum fishing intensity, so that there's some range of fishing intensities that are possible where you have a target fishing intensity that might be modified through a distribution procedure perhaps, but not to exceed some maximum fishing intensity. With that, that's the end of the update on actions from MSAB 14. And if there are no questions, or as I'm bringing up the next document, feel free to interject with any questions.
Chuck, do you want to try again?
I'll try again if I'm coming through at all. Yeah, what I'm noting is that we've, as far as the constraints, and it's bouncing all over the place, but MSAB 14 recommended one of the constraints being used, be it either the plus minus 15 or and or slow up, fast down. But and other documents are seem to be now just basically showing it as being a combined. And I'm just wondering exactly where we're sitting on what we're going to be discussing, because it doesn't matter. It seems to matter, or depend on which document you're looking at, exactly how that particular section on, which is paragraph 46, and I think on, yeah, anyhow, exactly how it's actually supposed to be looking. And they're different. And that'll be coming up later, I'm sure, but it's just when we're documenting and going back over this stuff over and over and it's changing, it starts to get confusing as to what we actually agreed on. That was my
thanks,
point.
Chuck.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chuck. I'd like to bring the attention to paragraph 49 from the MSAB015 report. And that states here these SPR's 30/20 control rule be evaluated along with constraints, and it lists three constraints and has this and or. And to be honest, Chuck, I sympathize that this is confusing, and part of the reason is I don't think that as the MSAB goes, and as well as the Secretariat and the MSE team, we have not come up with a real specific constraint that we will be evaluating. And part of that is some comments were made at the MSAB that it might be useful to evaluate these constraints in combination with each other. For example, the slow up, fast down approach might lend to a greater than 15% change in 1 year. But we could have a slow up, fast down approach and a 15% constraint on that. So I don't think the MSAB has actually come up with a specific way to evaluate the constraints or how they want them in the management procedure. So I think that's still open for discussion. And if we do want to have that discussion and have a more specific approach, that would be great. However, as we do our simulations as the MSE team, we learn a lot as we're going along, and we may actually say, hey, we want to try this out, and if it seems to work, we may present it to the MSAB as an additional procedure as well. Does that help?
Yes, it helps verbalizing it in that manner. It's just in the documents, it almost looks like it is going to be including a 15% plus the slow up, fast down. That's the way you're looking at it, or the 3-year process. And that's where it starts to be questionable. And this way we at least know that you're going to look at one or the other, and maybe both. But also in the metrics that we'll be discussing later, it doesn't show that. It shows them combined in some of the comparisons, and rather than it's just going to be one or the other. Just didn't allow it, and some are blank, and that becomes leading when we start discussing that, because the ones that show no constraints are likely almost going to be guaranteed not to work in comparison to the others. So we'll see how that discussion goes, but I know I appreciate the way you answered it just now.
Okay, we can clarify that at this meeting then.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. That's a good point to definitely come back to. That's something we don't want to get too far down the line before we need to make a course correction, if any. So on the speaker list, I have Jim, and then Peggy, and then Dan. Jim, go ahead.
That's okay. Alan and Chuck kind of got to most of it, so we're good.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. Peggy? Oh, sorry, Peggy, one moment. You're muted. I got to find a faster way to unmute people here.
That's me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. God, I was laughing at other people that were doing that. So could you please go up to paragraph 34 under the recommendations? I just have a question about this deliverable from October, which I like. But as I read this, the way that I understand that is that this would be a recommendation for a potential policy not to go below RSB 36% half of the time over a long term. So some vague, well, 50% is not vague, but long term is a little bit vague. And that's not the big thing I'm concerned about, though. The big thing I'm concerned about is that this is looking backward. So there's no, and I'm asking this question, is there any protective component of this management procedure that would help steer a policy a policy that we would not see ourselves going above, or sorry, below the 36% after we've already done it? Does that make sense? I'm not very, doesn't sound articulate.
Yeah, so as a, and I realize you were not at the MSAB015 meeting, so this was a big outcome of MSAB015 in my mind. But this is an objective. This isn't actually a procedure, but this would be an objective, and we would look at a procedure and its ability to meet this objective. So for example, if we had a real high fishing intensity management procedure that brought the stock down to 10% relative spawning biomass 90% of the time, it would not meet this objective. So there isn't really a risk here. What this objective is defining, that we have a target, that we want to be above 36% at least 50% of the time. And the long term has been defined by the MSAB, I believe, as 80 to 100 years or something like that. Far enough in the simulation such that it's come to an equilibrium, in other words. So this is an objective, and this is one of many objectives where a different objective is to not go below an RSB of 20%, I think more than 5% of the time. So using those two in concert with each other says, I want to target this, I want to make sure I'm around or hanging around 36%, but I don't want risk of going below 20%. So those two objectives are, they can work in concert with each other. Sometimes one will make the other a moot objective, but I think they're both useful to have in this context.
So let me
bring up the harvest control rule.
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead, Adam. Or Alan?
Yeah, no, sorry, Peggy. I was just going to ask if Alan could bring up the image of the harvest control rule. It might help explain the objective a little more too. While he's bringing that up, though, Peggy, please proceed.
I guess my question is altered from your response, Alan. These objectives really aren't measurable until the time has passed. So that's what I was sort of realizing here, is that we could have these great objectives, but we wouldn't know whether or not we've failed at meeting them until 80 or 100 years has gone by. That's an extreme example, but the thing I was hoping for is to be able to measure or create an objective that we can understand in a shorter time period whether it's working.
Yeah, good point, Peggy. The point of the MSE is to simulate this, what might happen with the stock with all the uncertainty that we may see in the future and variability, and determine how likely a management procedure is to meet that objective. So the alternative to that is applying an actual management procedure and seeing in practice if it actually works. That's a dangerous experiment to do. And it has been done in many fisheries, but it's dangerous because you don't know if that objective is going to be met, but you're actually trying it out. You might think of that as an adaptive management approach. But what we're doing with the MSE is we're avoiding what I like to sometimes call the live fire. And we can simulate anything. We can try anything out and see if it works or not in theory, and then put it into practice, sort of vetting it before we actually put it into practice. When we came up with this objective, we used all of the past data and did a lengthy analysis of surplus production and productivity to determine what are likely maximum sustainable yield and maximum economic yields that that we should be then defining the target based on. So a lot of work has gone into this 36%, identifying it as, given what we've seen in the past, over the past 100 years of fishing this halibut stock, what is likely a good target. So we have sort of that hindsight to guide us and the data to guide us. And now we're going to put together these management procedures and say, with all the variability that's possible in the future, will we meet this objective or will we not meet this objective? And then
yeah,
as we
thank you.
and as we get into practice, we'll be monitoring it. And that's part of having these annual meetings to make sure that we're not just setting something, set it and forget it. We don't want to forget it. We want to set it and make sure that every year we are looking at it and seeing if there's anything new that could be causing a departure from what our expectations were.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I appreciate that.
Okay, so
I'll put up this harvest control rule as the,
Yeah, I think that the question kind of went a different direction, but maybe it wouldn't hurt to reiterate. So there was kind of two components of that conversation. One was whether there's some sort of like retrospective ability to figure out if we've missed our objective or our target. And the response from Alan is that the reason one does closed loop simulation, that does MSE, is that you're simulating your fishery practice before you actually implement it. So it's a it's like you're in a flight simulator before you actually get into a real plane and crash it or not. So that's where MSEs in particular are quite helpful, that you're not doing this live fire exercise. The second piece about the specific recommendation from the October meeting around the target, might be helpful just to reiterate to folks what the target was, why the target was advanced. So my recollection from the commissioners and some folks at this table was that a target was desired to stop us from kind of living right on the edge of the trigger or threshold. In the absence of a target, some were concerned that the stock would always be trying to meet just the lowest common denominator of staying just above the threshold where the slope begins. And that can be an uncomfortable place to live in resource management because it adds quite a bit of variability as you come off of the ramp and go back onto the ramp. If you have a target, and you define a management procedure that tries to keep you around that target, you'll see that you're staying away from the ramp more often than not. So a target has the benefit of reducing some of the variability. This target in particular has a benefit of reducing some of the variability that you'll see from a successful procedure. Components or things that folks would consider in defining a target are things like maximum sustainable yield or maximum economic yield. And those were some of the pieces that the group had talked about in October that led to the definition of the SB 30 or RSB 36%.
Am I correct also that the target was designed as a fishery objective rather than a biological objective? So that's a nice thing to sort of keep in the back of your mind when you're trying to understand what that is.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point, Carey. Okay, Dan, you had a question?
No, I guess with a follow-up on what Chuck was saying, that my recollection of what we did at MSAB015 was to ask for the combined analysis of slow up, fast down. At MSAB014, we had separate analysis that showed slow up, fast down had lower year-to-year variability, but you could still take the big drop. And the Max 15 had higher year-to-year, but it prevented you from taking big drops. And we were looking at some of the results of that, and that's why we asked for a combined one to be looked at. And I think it's fine to revisit that as part of our discussion on what management procedures we want to have move forward. But if we do, it'd be nice if Alan could be ready to just show us those summary tables he showed us back in October that led us to that initial recommendation. Just trying to give Alan a heads up on what might be helpful for that discussion. And then the other thought I had was that, we, in October, we explicitly talked about this being a coastwide constraint, and that we weren't really identifying things on a distribution area level for a constraint yet, because we needed to see what the actual volatility was, what was causing that volatility before we could design our constraint for that. So I think the context of both of those are still at the coastwide scale, and I think we still have a kind of a thumbtack in, do we need to have something, you know, beyond the coastwide constraint at each area level because to handle volatility there? I'm not sure we can actually have that discussion until we see the results. That's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. I'll get those summary tables together tonight. I believe they're in a presentation from MSAB015. Unless people really want to see them today, I can dig them up during a break, but I might be able to get my head around it a little bit more if I do that tonight.
Yeah, I'd say let's wait till tomorrow. I think that the two important takeaways is understanding the different constraints that are either additive or you know, each acting on their own in different procedures, and then also flagging the point that Dan made about the management procedures. This recommendation was specifically around coastwide scale. We did have some discussion, fair bit of discussion, acknowledging that a lot of the scale piece is likely to change once we get into distribution as well. Or at least we need to revisit some of the scale pieces when we get through distribution. Okay, any other questions for paper 04?
Can I, Adam, I'll just make one more comment about that I think we ended up with a combined constraint when we were really trying hard to narrow down the number of management procedures. And so we had some in there in our longer list, if we look back, I think, that had either one or the other coastwide constraint. And I think we decided that on this particular point, in understanding what slow up fast down did relative to a max 15% change, those general concepts weren't going to change if applying them coastwide in a spatial analysis. And so we decided we didn't need to have, we've already done slow up fast down on its own. We've already done the 15% max constraint on its own, but we haven't done the combined. And I think that's how we ended up with that in our list of final management procedures, but not doing one at a time.
Right.
There are other aspects.
Yeah, that's my recollection as well.
Coastwide results from the coastwide analysis that we felt might change more once we move to a spatial model. And so those are still being experimented with, such as what are the appropriate SPR rates to use, et cetera.
Right.
So, Adam, it's Chris.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
So I just want to make sure we're clear on what we're saying here going forward. I mean, my understanding and the way the document's read, and I thought Dan sort of summarized it. It can be one or the other or both combined, and that was sort of going to be up for discussion until we saw some results. Is that what we're saying here?
In terms of a final recommendation, yes. I think the clarification that Carey pointed out was that for this, was it for this specific recommendation or just for the specific procedures that Alan or Secretary was going to work on over the next 6 months would focus on this?
Yeah, it was just, I'm sorry, it's not for the recommendation in particular. I think it was just for the final list of management procedures that we came up with. Focusing on combining those two constraints, the priority, because we have not tried that before, coastwide.
Okay, so sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Adam. Okay. I missed the last bit of the last MSAB, so I apologize for that. But just to feel like when you look at Appendix 6, it gives the proposed and recommended management procedures. Some include both of the constraints, some include one of the constraints. Some include no constraints. So just want to be clear on sort of what's moving forward.
Yeah, so my recollection is that we weren't excluding any of those specific procedures, but the list of 17 needed to be prioritized into a more manageable chunk that the Secretariat could work on. And so the procedures that combined plus minus 15% in slow up fast down were prioritized for evaluation in this sub list, the list of 10 rather than the list of 17. They were prioritized because we have not yet seen much by way of performance for a combined and additive constraint. We have seen some performance for just slow up fast down, just plus minus 15%.
Chris, if I can clarify, it's Vera. In Appendix 6, you have two tables. So Table 1 is the full list of the management procedure proposed. And then you have Table 2, which is a short list of those 17. So if you look at Table 2, you have the recommended management procedure for evaluation at MSAB015, and that's the 10 that Carey was mentioning. So in there, you will only see that there is the combined constraint that is the slow up, fast down plus the max change 15%.
Yeah, I know. I think that clarifies it. So thank you.
Okay. Anything else on document 4? What the outcomes of MSAB014?
Yeah, this is Chuck. I had put my
Hi, Chuck.
list on the chat line for speakers since you can't see my picture. I guess just this past discussion, Carey used the word that this is a final list, and I believe the understanding was that this was prioritized because of the immense time it takes to even do the 9 or 10, and that the remainder ones would be done later. But this was the first wave of them that we were going to be putting through, that they were not going to be the final list because there are others in there that need to be looked at as well.
Chuck, thank you for that clarification. I meant the final list ending as of the last meeting for Alan to analyze between meetings, and not the final list for the commissioners. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
I think that does put that's a clarification that actually I'd like to see. So when do we go from Table 2 back to Table 1, or some new version? Like, when is Table 2 going to be revised? Or I don't know if we're going to be able to do it at this meeting without much by way of results. Jumping ahead a little bit, but something I think we do need to be able to come back to, because I know at least myself at the annual meeting had a number of questions from a conference board in particular about, well, my favorite management procedure in Table 1, or none of the tables, wasn't on Table 2. How do I get mine on Table 2, and when do I get to put it on there? So I think that's for a subsequent agenda item when we talk about the procedures, but I do want to flag here that's something that at least I know I've been asked, and I presume others were as well.
Yeah, Adam, I was planning to have that discussion during the program of work agenda item. During the program of work agenda item, we'll be talking about sort of looking forward through 2020, the year 2020.
Yeah, that sounds good. And you mean the Thursday program of work, not the one that's scheduled for 20 minutes from now?
Right.
Okay. Thanks very much. Looking at time, I think maybe it's probably useful to move on to paper 5.
Okay, thanks. And I don't see anybody unmuted on the chat. So this is just, again, the outcomes of the SRB 15, which has remained unchanged, well, the SRB has not met since MSAB 14, so there's no new report to report on. And this document is just identifying some of those recommendations and notes that are applicable to the MSE from that SRB meeting. With that, I'm not going to say much more about it. There are some recommendations which we're taking in, and we'll report back to the SRB on these. I will open up the next document, and while I wait to see if anybody has any comments on the SRB recommendation or report.
For the SRB, Alan, was there any feedback from the, sorry, I should look this up myself. I was thinking from the annual meeting, if there's anything from SRB members that we should maybe anticipate them putting forward.
I think one One thing that Dr. Cox was talking about at the annual meeting was this paragraph 51 here, listed here, in that the commission develop a standard criterion for achieving a limited set or overarching objectives to help really winnow down the management procedures quite quickly, to identify which ones aren't working and then which smaller set we should focus on. And at the annual meeting, I presented our the plan for doing the evaluation, which was we have these conservation objectives, which are measurable objectives with tolerances assigned to them, and that's going to narrow down the set of management procedures quite quickly. And what the MSAB is going to be tasked with is really evaluating the trade-offs between those various fishery objectives. So I see the SRB potentially talking about this with us in sort of our plan for doing the evaluation and how we're going to actually do the evaluation. And you can review the annual meeting document for how I thought that we would. And I believe at MSAB015 we had that discussion defining tolerances or not defining tolerance in the objectives to specifically evaluate trade-offs or leave them as a real more strict performance measure that says the management procedure makes it or doesn't make it. And I note also that the SRB membership, there'll be at least one new face on the SRB coming up in June. And that's going to be an online meeting date as well. Yeah, and that'll be an online meeting as well.
Yeah, that point about a standard criterion for achieving a set of objectives is a good one. I think it's something that would be helpful for us to keep in mind, particularly as we get to the evaluation piece, about really focusing on our key set of objectives, and then does it achieve it or not, as opposed to really focusing on the whole plethora of performance metrics. Just, we have our objectives, did this procedure meet the objective? And use that as a first cut, so that we're not going down a rabbit hole of tweaking different performance metrics. Okay.
So yeah, so I'll open up the next document unless and wait for any questions while I'm doing that.
Jump in there real quick on respond to Adam. I mean, I think that's a rabbit hole that we continually try to avoid going down, and the two sides of that discussion are, do we reopen our whole objectives and try and find some with tolerances that really get at the scope of considerations people have, or do we keep it to just a few of our primary objectives and then have a lot of performance statistics that people can look at and see the whole picture? And I just think there's two ways that people go about this. One is I'll know it when I see it. It'll give me a couple of different indicators that I can look at and evaluate trade-offs. And the other is, no, we're just going to try and distill everything down to two trade-offs, and we'll put a tolerance on it, and it's a win or lose thing. And I think we've had these discussions at a lot of meetings, and what we've got is kind of the compromise we reached, which is we have some conservation objectives with tight tolerances on them. We've got some management objectives around variability and yield, which are, you know, prioritized. And then we've got some statistics that help people understand how, you know, the variety of different considerations go into some of those objectives. And, you know, we can try and reopen the whole objectives thing again, but every meeting we end up kind of going down that rabbit hole and we don't get much farther than we've actually gotten so far. Yeah. Those are my thoughts on it. I'm kind of happy with the suite we've got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree with that, that we're, and that I don't think we need to add a whole bunch more right now. Let's make some progress with what we've got.
Yeah, I would agree with Dan also. I think we've come to a really good place with our objectives and our evaluation, and you may have noticed that I do not have objectives anywhere on the agenda for this meeting. But if there are no more comments on the SRB document, I will discuss the outcomes of the annual meeting and the sixth special session of the commission. which does have a little bit on objectives.
Yeah, please proceed.
Okay, so you may have remembered at the annual meeting, the report from the annual meeting was a lot of the commission recalled what the MSAB and the Secretariat have been doing with regard to the MSE, with a note that they would take up some more specific decision-making part of the MSE or those recommendations from the MSAB during a special session in February, and that is exactly what happened. So the report has a lot of noted, agreed, regarding the MSAB recommendations. The commission didn't really disagree or didn't, in my interpretation, really change any of the recommendations coming from the MSAB. They felt things were moving forward. The special session, which I'm just scrolling down to now, came up with, let me just verify that, yes. So the special session was a very fruitful discussion with the commissioners regarding the MSE. And we spent an hour or two, I would say, having this discussion with the commission. And they had basically two statements that came out of that special session. The first is that the commission recommended the primary coastwide and area specific objectives outlined in Table 1 of this document as well. And this document is online as CR is, it blanks on what it stands for. Circular. So circular, right. I was thinking continuing resolution for some reason. But it was released in a circular with all of these statements as well as some other statements as well. But related to the MSE is they recommended the objectives as were stated in the MSAB 14 report. So that was good. And we had quite a lengty discussion about those objectives, and the commission thought they were good. I'll just note that they put in the statement, be used for evaluating MSE results conditional on future consideration of the objectives after the preliminary MSE results are presented at MSAB 15. What this statement says to me is exactly what the MSE process is that this is an iterative process. We learn from every step in this process. We've defined objectives, we've defined management procedures, we need to see results. Once we see those results, we're going to go back and make sure that our objectives and our management procedures are what we do want to work with in this process. So I felt that was really good, and they're embracing that iterative process as well. Let me just show you briefly the table of objectives to remind everybody. This table is also exactly as shown here in our MSAB 14 report. And this is all that I was planning to talk about objectives was we have conservation objectives, keeping the female spawning biomass above a limit. And that limit was 20% of unfished. And then also we preliminarily defined some limits on the distribution side of things, and this is where we'll really have to revisit as we start getting results. This is the objective, conservation objective of maintaining, or actually a fishery objective, maintaining a spawning biomass around a level that optimizes fishing activities. This is that 36% with a tolerance defined. So these are the objectives that have tolerances that would really be used to identify whether a management procedure meets these objectives or does not meet these objectives. If it does not meet these objectives, it does not go through to further evaluation. The other two broad categories of objectives or general objectives are limiting catch variability and providing directed fishery yield. There's a number of different sort of measurable objectives in there that are specific to coastwide or regulatory areas and different concepts. And those are, again, without tolerances and more that we'll be looking at to evaluate the trade-offs between. So that's a reminder of the objectives. That's all that I was planning to talk about those objectives until we start seeing more results and can revisit and see if those objectives are satisfactory in our process. The second statement made by the commissioners at this special session relates to the specific recommendation that the MSAB made and the results of the Coastwide MSE. I was very happy to see this. the commission make this recommendation of basically a reference SPR fishing intensity of 43% with a 30-20 control rule be used as an updated interim harvest policy, noting that there are additional components intended to apply for a period 2020 to 22 as defined in the report from the last annual meeting. More specifically, those are the allocations to 2A and 2B and accounting for some impacts of the U26 non-directed discard mortality. So this is great. The commission is now making a recommendation that is based on the MSE results. So everybody in the MSAB should be patting themselves on the back for a job well done. We've done a lot of work, and now that's actually transpired into policy and guidance. So when Ian does present the assessment at the annual meeting in 2020 and also the interim meeting in 2019, or we are in 2020, the interim meeting in 2020, the annual meeting in 2021, he will be using this 43% as an interim management procedure in his mortality table and in the decision table as well. So that's the outcomes of the special session, and I can take any questions if anybody has any. While everybody's thinking about that, and maybe it's just nobody wants to open up objectives again.
Alan, did you participate you presented at that special session, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So,
was there any takeaways from the commissioners' thoughts on the process or what their interest was? I mean, my recollection is this special session was set in part because there was just too much else going on at the annual meeting, and they didn't feel like there was enough time dedicated to MSE at the AM, so they wanted to have a block of time. I thought that was good that the commissioners were interested and engaged in the MSE work. Was there anything else that came from it, or was it mostly just going through the checklist to make sure they could get all their deliverables done?
It was actually a very good discussion. They had a lot of questions about the objectives, about what the target objective meant, the 36%, and it made me realize why they made the decision at the annual meeting to delay this a little bit. Is they just wanted to hear more and have a more discussion about what the MSAB has been doing and what the Secretariat has been doing and why these recommendations are really coming out. And so given that, I think the only concern is, and they stated it in their statement, you know, these conditional on future consideration of the objectives, is they just wanted to make sure these are not the objectives being set in stone, that this iterative process continues, and that we're learning from those.
Okay, well, that's helpful, thanks. I think that's good news. I ask in part because I recall some of the conversations we've had in Sitka and also prior to that about, I think, a bit of a struggle that the MSAB has had in finding ways to effectively engage commissioners. We've said a number of times how important we feel it is to have commissioners really involved in this session so that they have a good, deep understanding of the recommendations that come forward. I think this special session helped meet some of those needs. I'm glad to hear that, and keep thinking on other ways that we can have the commissioners really engaged as we come up to delivery of some long anticipated results.
Yeah, I agree. And as a reminder, we were hoping to have some commissioner or inviting the commissioners to the October meeting for more specific evaluation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I anticipate commissioners asking for maybe more in-depth updates as we get closer to it at some of their work meetings or subsequent meetings of this group.
Right. If there are no more questions on the annual meeting or the special session, I can just, what I wanted to do was just a real quick reminder of our work plan for 2020. and then take a short break and then get into the presentation on the management procedures.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Just for folks around the room, the idea of this agenda item was an acknowledgement that obviously this meeting is a little bit different than what we had envisioned it was going to be like a number of months ago, or even at the annual meeting. So while we do have a chunk of time dedicated to talk about the program of work later in the session, this is just a brief refresher of where we hope to be, and we can use this information. We can let this information kind of percolate in the background as we go through some of the results from this meeting to help us provide some advice on Thursday or whenever we get to the program of work piece to revise our recommendations. We'd also talked about considering what this group looks like post 2021. There was a very brief conversation at the annual meeting about that.
That's true, and if I may backtrack for one second. I guess another outcome of the annual meeting was consideration of where the MSE may continue after the annual meeting in 2021. And for example, this 83, the commission did note the MSE is an appropriate tool for other analyses. I don't want to jump ahead too much because we do have a lot to focus on in 2020 and getting these distribution results to the annual meeting, or AMO 97. But it was encouraging to me to see the commission thinking ahead and realizing that the tools that we're building now are not these one-off tools that we're going to do this analysis with, that these tools, we're actually building tools that will be used for a long period of time to do many different analyses. And I think what we'll be doing is filling in all those gaps and all those documents Ian and I have been writing where we're doing these quick analyses. And at the end, we usually say the MSE is probably the more appropriate method to do this type of analysis, or another way to look at it. So we'll be able to do those after we build these tools. May I move on?
Yes,
all
please.
right, so just a brief overview. This is 2020 leading up to the annual meeting in 2021, which is AMO 97. And so here we are at MSAB015, reviewing goals and objectives, which we had on our work plan, which we're not really doing in this. As we've noted, it's probably best to cut that off for now and continue working with what we have. We'll bring that up in subsequent analyses or evaluations. We're going to review the simulation framework here. We're going to review what some of the multi-area model, although we have not presented any results of the multi-area model at this point in time. And then reviewing the preliminary results that is not going to be able to be done at MSAB015. But again, identifying the management procedures is a real big outcome of this, guiding us forward. I realize hard to do without seeing preliminary results, but we'll do what we can, and we've already had some good discussions about the constraints. In the June SRB meeting, they'll take a more technical look at the framework and the multi-area model. And so we'll have some results of the actual modeling and how the multi-area model is able to mimic the population dynamics of Pacific halibut. And then they'll be able to review any preliminary results of the MSE at that point in time, provide guidance to us that we'll then bring back to the SRB in September and reviewing penultimate results of the MSE, of this first round of the MSE. And by penultimate there, I mean they may have some insight into how we can further enhance the results that we presented, additional management procedures, a different way to incorporate the simulations or the framework, for example. And we'll do our best to incorporate any of those recommendations before the October MSAB meeting. And that will be, that October MSAB meeting is going to be a very important meeting of reviewing results and providing those recommendations for the MPs, scale and distribution, where scale is the coastwide level, distribution are to the regulatory areas, and provide those recommendations to bring to the annual meeting in 2021. So we've already been through that process in a sort of an exercise, you might say, with the Coastwide MSE. That is exactly what happened last year. The MSAB provided some very useful recommendations that were brought to the commission, and now we're doing that again on this one-year timeline, which is why the MSE team is working extremely hard to get this done, and to make sure that everything is accurate and representative of what we need it to be representative of. We'll revisit this program of work on Thursday or at the end of near the end of the meeting, and be able to modify this as we move forward. But for now, just keep this in mind. We've already had a discussion about potentially squeezing in some special session in August before the SRB meeting to see where the results are at that time.
All right, thanks, Alan. Any brief comments or points of clarification on the schedule that you see on the screen now?
As people are coming up, I'll just show the agenda real quick again.
So yeah, we're just coming up to a break.
And we're exactly on time.
Yeah. So what I would suggest is, if there aren't any questions now, that we take our break, but that we will come back and do one of those more deliberate around the room points for everyone. So folks can collect their thoughts over the break, and then we'll have a chance for everyone to speak up. Even if you don't have much to add, you can just say nothing to add for the moment. But I think it would be good to dedicate some time. Sorry, Carey.
Should we just do a brief summary of the morning before we take a break?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so if that works for people, then let's do a brief summry. I've got a couple of points here. Carey, did you have something as well?
Yeah, I wrote down some notes, but I'm happy we can do it either way.
Okay. Well, would you mind going, and I can scribble on my notes as well? Okay.
That's great. So we started out the morning introducing some new MSAB members, and also re-upping my co-chair role for another 2 years. So we introduced Maggie Smith from ODF and W, and also Angus. I don't remember Angus's last name right now.
Mr. Grout.
Thank you. Who's a commercial halibut fisherman in Canada. We went through, and also Rachel Baker, who is rejoining us. We went through update on actions from the last MSAB, and in that we reminded ourselves why we have management procedures that have sort of two constraints piled on top of each other at once, and why we prioritize that. The discussion that we had at the last meeting about whether we will need to apply constraints spatially. We reviewed the objective to have a target, which is a fishery objective, and its basis, which it's based on MSY and EY, which we spent quite a bit of time on at some previous meetings. And so trying to stay kind of away from the ramp for stability, but also trying to maximize yield or maximize economic yield. One of those two things. So that's based on some analysis that Alan did. We reviewed the SRB document and really just focused on pointing out that the SRB was pushing us towards having kind of a set of objectives that we don't need to revisit during every meeting. And then we reviewed the IPHC intersessional meeting notes, where we found that they felt like things were moving forward and they didn't change any recommendations. And during their special session, which is described in Circular 007 for people who are interested, the commissioners reviewed the objectives and they kind of were on board with them, but noted that this process should still be iterative. There should be some opportunity at some point in the future to revisit those if needed, and also kind of put their stamp on the idea of an interim management procedure with a 43% SPR with a 30-20 control rule, with some other specific directives mixed in with that were applied this past year. And then we went over the program of work and revisited the idea that we may need to have some sort of summer meeting, and that's something that we'll talk about in more detail later on in this meeting, once we've gotten through a few more of the materials. So that's what I have. Adam, do you have more to add to that?
Not a whole lot more. Maybe just to note that the agenda for this session will be compressed as needed. We're not going to be bound by the times per se. If we're moving along faster, we may end up concluding this meeting a little bit faster. We did have a bit of discussion around what the key deliverables are for MSAB015. I would say let's first refer to the papers, which have a set of recommendations or next steps in them. But if we were to put it in one word, I'd say the key deliverable for this meeting is refining management procedures for the MSC team's evaluation. And this is probably going to necessitate the subsequent meeting. Now, we did hear from Alan. He would say August, not earlier than August. And I think David said there'd be less padding was the word, maybe less formality around this intersessional MSAB meeting is needed. So we're going to need to dedicate more time to that discussion about figuring out what our immediate next steps are. But first, let's see the presentations from the Secretariat before we get to that step. Yeah, thanks very much, Carey.
I've got one more comment. Maggie's last name is Summer, not Smith. I'm mixing and matching my Maggies. So welcome to Maggie Summer.
Sorry, I missed that too. Okay, so let's take the break now. Come back at 5 after 11. We'll give ourselves a 10-minute break. And just before we get into agenda item 4.1, we'll go around the room for MSAB members and see if they have any specific things that they want to raise with respect to the plan for MSAB015 over the next couple of days. When we're on break, I'll turn my screen off. Alan, I don't know if it'll just be a shared screen, I guess, then?
I'll keep the agenda up and the webcam on in the boardroom. And whenever you're ready to bring the meeting back to order, just
okay.
Go ahead.
Great. Okay. We'll get going.
And if I just make one quick note, as you're on break, think about if there's anything that's not working or is working for the online portion of this meeting. It seems to be going really well on my end. But if you have any suggestions for improvement, let us know. We'll try to adapt during the meeting. But also feel free to write any comments to the Secretariat here at IPHC. This is our first meeting this year in this format. We'll probably be having other meetings in this format. So we're really looking forward to hear people's comments of what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a good prompt, Alan. So maybe the two questions to consider over the break, and we'll come back to folks with, is any feedback on this current meeting format so that it can inform subsequent Secretariat or Commission meetings, and something more specific for us is what do you feel you need to see out of this meeting to make it a constructive use of your time? Okay, folks, we'll talk in 10 minutes.
Exactly. For both of you. So I think we can get the meeting started again. Hopefully we've got everyone back who we need to have back. And let's see. I'm going to open the list of attendees, and what we were going to do first before we move on to other items is go through person by person And we've got a couple of questions. One is, do you have any comments on the program of work and the morning in general that you'd like to make? And the second question was regarding whether you have any ideas about improvements for the format of the meeting, I believe, and how everything is working online for you. So I'm just going to go down the list of participants here, and this is where it's useful if you put in your, I think we're going to ask MSAB members, is that right, Adam? Yeah, so it'll be useful if you put in your whole name rather than just some initials, because that helps me know who you are. The first person I see on here is Angel. Angel, do you have, feel free to turn your webcam on and make any comments that you'd like to make.
No comment at this time. Thank you, Carey. Appreciate it.
Okay. The next person I see is Angus.
Yeah, no comment from me, just the format seems to be working well.
Okay. Chris. Chris Spohr.
Yeah, can you hear me now, Carey? Sorry, I was muting and unmuting.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have the webcam turned on. There's a, I think it's a dance class going on by Zoom in the other room. And I've had in past experience like calls like this, the bandwidth doesn't always cooperate. So I don't think, hopefully tomorrow I'll be using the webcam. So anyway, just some comments on the program of work or the morning session. One thing I think I was thinking about during the break is, I think that as we're talking and we're trying to decide on management procedures going forward, and we had some of the discussions about constraints and that, I just think if we could all think a little bit on a framework of, so that if we come back in August with some results, we're going to have to turn that around fairly quickly. If we could think about, you know, okay, we're going to pick 10 of them, and maybe that's already been done. I wasn't at the last meeting, but you know, like, okay, management procedure A can compare to C, and B can compare to F, and just so that when we're looking at them, if there's certain things people want to see, like how different constraints react, we've got a way to do that coming up in August. That's my only thought there on the morning session, because I think we are going to be challenged for time here. And that's just one thing that came to mind. In terms of the impacts on the format of the meeting, you know, this is all new to all of us, and we're all trying how to make this work. So far, I think it's working fairly well. And I think, you know, if we continue to get suggestions from people, that'll be a good idea, because I think we're going to have more of this in the future than less. So that's all I have to say at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So let's see, I see Chuck next.
Okay, I think I'm on.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess I just adding to what Chris had to say. I think number one, in thinking about how October meeting went, and I know Chris was very, very sick, and we got rushed at the end on putting together these management procedures. And had we given them more thought at the time as how the constraints are going to be used or looked at for this initial process, I know on one of them, I think it's J, we would have added a constraint. So it just, in knowing now that how we're trying to compare apples and apples, but yet you're comparing apples and oranges, and how this is all going to look at going forward if the others aren't going to be looked at either separately and additionally. That'll be part of the discussion, I think, as we come up and start discussing these.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So some concerns about our quote final, our
whether we did not
current list, our current list.
One is going to be.
I'm sorry, can you just say that again? Maybe like the last two sentences you said I missed, Chuck.
I'm not sure exactly what. I mean, basically, it was just I just think on hindsight that we rushed. We're so busy trying to put together the list that we missed some of the aspects that how it's going to actually play out. And now we're realizing how some of these are going to play out. And when you're trying to compare against the other ones that have constraints, you're not talking apples and apples, you're talking apples, oranges. And I don't know how science is going to look at that when they're not, we really won't know the whole picture at this particular point in time.
So I think what you're saying is perhaps an opportunity at some point during this meeting to revisit the management procedures that are currently on the table for analysis. And I think that will be part of our discussion later on.
Yes.
Alan, correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you.
Sounds right, yeah. And we'll have that opportunity during our program of work agenda item.
Great. Okay. Let's see. I see Dan. Dan Falvey.
Yeah, there. Yeah, I think my comments are similar to Chuck and Chris's, is that maybe we could give some thought in before Thursday into how to structure that talk about the management procedure moving forward table. So we understand, what's a final suite, final package look like, or to what extent we can still have concepts in that table, and then we'll be able to come back once we see how those concepts work and repackage them into a final cohesive 2 or 3 alternatives. And I think when we put this table together, it was to explore these concepts and see the results here at the May meeting that we might then adjust and repackage a little bit to get a second look at in October. We're not going to have that opportunity, it seems like, or it'll be a more limited opportunity between August and October. So how can we be most productive at this meeting in terms of packaging alternatives that, we want to make sure we have all the pieces together in one cohesive management procedure that has different elements. And you don't have to answer that now. It's just something to think about how to structure Thursday's discussion to make that happen.
Okay, great. Yes. So how can we be most efficient in our list of management procedures, given that we will probably have a chance to review that in late summer, perhaps. It's a good comment. Thank you, Dan. I see Forrest.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add right now. Thanks, Carey.
Mm-hmm. Glenn? Glenn may have stepped away. Glenn Merrill? Okay, we'll go on. I'll give Ian Stewart. Do you have anything to add at this time?
Nothing to add. I just want to say I look forward to the next chance we get to actually see each other in person. I think Alan's doing a great job, but we're doing our best here.
Yes, likewise. That will be really great. Okay, let's see. I see James Johnson. James Johnson, you are a member of the MSAB, is that correct? Yes. Trying to remember everyone's last names right now.
That's correct.
Do you have comments?
No, thank you.
Okay, great. Jeff Kaufman. Jeff. Okay, well, Jeff will get you in the next discussion. I hope this is not just an instance of being muted and not being able to get unmuted somehow. Jim Lane.
Hi, how you doing? You hear me?
Good. Yes,
okay.
I can hear you.
Yeah, because I'm using my big screen at work, and the video stuff I haven't quite figured out. I thought I had it pretty, between Chuck and Dan and Chris. I thought I had it pretty clear in my mind, but now I'm a bit confused as to, okay, whatever their management procedures are, it's kind of like I thought we were evaluating them based on our current suite of objectives and what's in, what's out. If they make it, that's what we would present, and the other information that goes along with them that is there for other, for further things. I guess it'd be better to have at some point a clear discussion of just exactly how this is going to work, and maybe that won't happen until we have some results. But to me, I thought we were evaluating as to that current objectives, and our task was what met the objectives and what did not. Not that further going on and saying, well, we like these, we don't like those. We could do that, but I didn't see how that was going to change what we would present to the commissioners as to what met the objectives.
Jim, I had sorry if I interject, I had a similar question. I was scribbling some notes after hearing comments from others, and I think what's starting to become clear to me is MSE provides a good framework to a good structured evaluation of how different procedures perform. But what I've just come to realize is that with the number of people on the MSAB and the number of interests that are here, we almost need some sort of framework to identify procedures. Like, I don't know if there's anything in the literature that talks about advice on not so much evaluating procedures, but some structured decision-making framework for identifying procedures. We don't have enough time or enough resources to evaluate all the procedures that folks could dream up here. And so we need some sort of way to pare down the to-do list for the Secretariat.
Oh, I get that. I guess my point was, we have these management procedures, and we're talking about some with combined constraints, some without. I guess my initial thought that our first, sort of hierarchical was, what of the management procedures that we're going to evaluate, what meet the core objectives that the commission has said we were supposed to work with, and then once that's done, and then okay, then you're left with these with those. And then, do we then repackage, as Dan was saying, look at those and repackage things, or what's the process after that? Is it goes to the SRB or does it back to the commissioners? I guess I'm kind of not really clear how that goes. I mean, I get the evaluation part. What happens after? Because here's what met our objectives for conservation objectives, and there are other ones. And all right, now what do we do?
Okay, yeah, let's think on that a little bit more. That's a good point, Jim.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. So let's see, Joe Morelli.
Joe had a couple of conflicts. He may have had to step off this morning.
Okay.
So maybe we can move on, and if folks have been skipped over, they can come back.
Yes, yeah, please let me know at the end if I've skipped over any MSAB members. Maggie Summer.
Nothing for me at this time, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Peggy Parker.
Nothing from me either, except I really think we're doing a great job on GoToMeeting. It will be great to see everyone in person.
Thank you, Peggy. Pear.
Yeah, you got me? Okay. Yeah, as Carey said, our objectives are somewhat set, but we got to understand there'll be some tweaking to objectives, and the management procedure has got to allow for that, some tweaking, and ultimately the commissioners would decide which objectives are going to be, the ones that are most relevant to them. That's it.
Thank you, Pear. We'll go to Piera.
Hi, everybody. Nothing from me at this moment. Just I hope to see you again soon in person.
Thank you, Piera. Rachel Baker. It's possible Rachel had to step away for a minute. We'll have to come back. So let's see. I do see one commissioner online here. I see Richard Yamada. I know you're not a member of the MSAB, but you're certainly very important to this process. So I want to give you an opportunity if you want to say anything.
No, not at this time. Just thank you for all the work you folks have been putting in on this. Very interested in the process and the work you folks are doing. So thanks.
Thank you. Robert.
Yeah, I have nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. And then Sarah Webster.
Yeah, I have nothing to add at this time, but thank you guys for organizing all of this and getting it going, even though we can't be there together.
Yeah, thank you. Scott Mazzoni.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for putting this together. This meeting seems to be working out just great. My one concern, I think Chuck raised it a little bit, it seems like we're in rust in this process. I want to make sure that we have adequate time to address all of our concerns. And if there is a discussion about having a summer meeting potentially, please take note of the negative tides and plan the meeting around those. Thank you.
Okay. All right, great. So negative tides, we need to pay attention. Tom Marking. So we see you, Tom, but we don't hear you. Is that a problem that we can resolve? Or Alan, or me? I wonder if I unmute.
He gave us a thumbs up.
Okay. There may have been multiple organizers trying to unmute Tom at the same time. Well, Tom, if you want to perhaps use, we did see you on video, so we know you're on GoToMeeting.
No, Mike. Okay, good work.
Thank you. That's wonderful. You're also welcome to use the chat window if you actually do have further comments and we can't hear you. So, but that was wonderful. Thank you. That is the end of my list. Just looking down the list of attendees right now. Did I miss anyone?
Carey, I just wanted to note Steve Barikoff, member of the MSE team, our programmer in Colorado. Just wondering if he has any comments.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know who Steve was just by first name, so thank you for.
Any comments, Steve? There you go.
I don't have any comments, but thank you for letting me have the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thank you.
Carey. And that's Jeff Kaufman.
Okay, great. Jeff.
Yeah, I figured out how to work the mute and unmute button on the computer, even though I'm on the phone. So my apologies. No one didn't hear me earlier as well, but I don't have anything to add at this point, but just testing it out here. Thank you.
Okay. Great.
Carey, one thing I had to add was I agree. I think we're still early on, but I think things are working pretty well given the that it's all quite new, this meeting structure. I do wonder though, once the meeting materials change, like when we get into some more substantive conversations in October, if we were to have a go-to meeting for the October meeting, I do wonder if we'll still be as successful as we've been so far. I don't have any answers yet. I just, looking ahead, I think it's plausible that we're we're not going to be able to have a face-to-face meeting, or at least international travel for the October meeting. So we should be prepared to think about what MSAB016 might look like. Let's cover that though on Thursday.
Yeah, Adam, thank you for bringing that up, and I do think we should come back to that topic on Thursday. What might the October meeting look like, and what do we need to be prepared for with that? I think it's a possibility that even if travel were allowed across borders, that there would be people who are uncomfortable with that, depending on what's going on at that time. So we should think about all the possibilities. Great. So if that's everyone, I'll give one more chance for anyone who I missed to speak up, or anyone who has to chime in now.
Hey, it's Anne-Marie.
Hi, this is, I'm sorry, who?
Anne-Marie.
Anne-Marie. Hi, Anne-Marie.
Sorry, hi, sorry, that was me with the initials. Fortunately had it.
I should have decoded that.
Webinar is working great for me. I think my one concern about the meeting, the process is that if we have results presented in October, that'll be the first chance that we get, or sorry, August, that'll be the first chance that we see results, and we'll be able to provide some alternative suggestions in terms of management procedures. To which point we'll see the results in October, but then that's it. So there'll only be one chance to actually adjust management procedures between now and something that needs to go to the commissioners. So not sure, yeah, probably this, either the last thing that people want to hear or the second last thing that people want to hear, but is there an opportunity to have another like touch base meeting somewhere between October and the annual meeting?
Perhaps we can write that down as a question, and when we come back to talking about a summer meeting and the October meeting, we can make sure that that's on the agenda to discuss.
Yeah, and one, the between October and the annual meeting is going to be difficult, but there is the interim meeting in that time period to get some feedback from at least the commission.
Yeah.
I like Dan's suggestion. He just said if Peace Arch Park is open, we can meet there in October. Don't even have to cross the borders.
Right. Okay. Great. So I think we've gotten a good idea of people's comments here. I've taken some notes on them. There were some comments on the list of management procedures, how we're going to be efficient at that, how we're going to package it, revisiting, which I think we will do later in the meeting. And also some comments about summer meetings and meetings between October and the annual meeting in terms of timing and the need to consider whether things will be in person, people's schedules, such as considering negative tides. And that will also be a topic that we'll come back to, and we'll note those particular points when we come back to them. So with that, let's move on to the next agenda item, which I believe is management procedures for coastwide scale that the MSE team is going to present. And of course, this is a topic that we've heard about and have digested before, and we've looked at the results for the management procedures for coastwide scale. And so let's hear what the MSE team wants to tell us about that today.
All right, thanks, Carey. I'm going to actually turn this presentation over to Piera, and I'm going to give her control of the screen. I'm going to make her a presenter. And so, Piera, I'm about to make you a presenter, and she'll give this presentation, which is an overview of the management procedures, what they are, and what we've been working on thus far. Great. Perfect. I can see your screen, Piera.
Can you also hear me?
Yes, can hear you too.
Perfect. Well, hi everybody. Nice seeing you or hearing you here, and thanks for attending this meeting. So this is item 04, and I think this presentation on management procedure might be useful to clarify some of the questions you had previously, or maybe raise more questions, and hopefully will help the discussion also later on management procedures. So I will just go through what happened at the intersessional meeting very briefly, since Alan has already mentioned it. I will then remind you what management procedures actually are. And then I will present you how we foresee the procedure to distributing the TCY. I will go through what is our current interim management procedure, and then I will summarize what we've been deciding during MSAB015 in terms of management procedures. So which management procedure have we decided to explore, and yeah, I will basically summarize that. So let's get started. The 96th session of the annual meeting discussed the recommendation on the Coastwide results of the MSC, as you all remember. And they agreed to hold an intersessional meeting soon after the MAO96 to provide further direction. And this intersessional meeting was very successful, as Alan mentioned, because the Commission actually endorsed a lot of the work that we've been doing in the last, year and more even. So on the Coastwide MSC results, the Commission noted that SPR values greater than 40%, and actually SPR values in the range between 40 to 46%, a control rule of 30-20, and some kind of constraint on the annual change in the TCY actually meet the objectives. So that was a note from the Commission. But then the important outcomes were those two recommendations. So the first recommendation is that the Commission recommended that the primary coastwide and area-specific objectives be used for evaluating MSC results. So the Commission endorsed the objective that we put forward. And then the Commission recommended a reference SPR fishing intensity of 43% with a 30-20 control rule be used as an updated interim harvest policy consistent with the MSC results. So again, the work that we've been doing and that we've been presenting has been endorsed by the Commission. And these were great outcomes, as Alan mentioned already. So said that, let's go back to what we mean with management procedure. What are management procedure? So I think you might all remember this figure. This is what we call the closed loop. So on the left, we have the operating model, and the operating model is just basically a model that tries to simulate the reality, what's happening out there. And we cannot control the operating model because the operating model depends on the ecosystem, on the biology of the fish. So it's something that we cannot control. What we can control when we manage a fish stock is how we act on the stock itself. So this is what the management procedure does, basically. And there are three elements to the management procedure. So there is the first element is the monitoring. So when we go out at sea, we collect data, we have a survey, which provides us with all sorts of information. And so we collect all this data and we put all this data into an estimation model, which is a statistical model that provides us with some management-related quantities. And that's what Ian does when he goes away for a month and locked in his office, just run those models. And then when he provides us with those quantities, we can apply the harvest control rule. The harvest control rule that basically tell us how to distribute the harvest through the regulatory areas, if there should be some size limits, some catch caps and floor, and so on. And all this information get back into the operating model. So that's what the closed loop does, but let's go more into detail of how the management procedure is structured. So we have the monitoring. So when we go out at sea and we sample fish, we cannot sample the whole population. That's impossible. So all the data that we collect have some uncertainty around it. And that's what we try to reproduce when we generate data from the operating model. So we generate data with error, just try to mimic the same monitoring process. And the data that we generated are, for example, indices of abundance. So we try to generate the survey NPUE and the commercial WPUE, and then proportionate age in the catch. So these are the two main sources of information that we generate. And those data are provided by the operating model at the regional and regulatory area levels. So after the operating model generates this data, we aggregate them into a coastwide level, and we use them into an estimation model. So in reality, Ian does this part of the estimation, let's say. If you remember, in the coastwide MSC, we were just simulating this estimation error. We were not actually doing any assessment. On the other hand, this time on this area-based MSC, we tried to reproduce this process as closely as we could. And so we decided to use actually part of the ensemble that Ian uses to provide the management-related quantities we need. And in particular, we chose two of the models that Ian uses in its ensemble. And we chose the long coastwide and the short coastwide model. So if you remember, the ensemble is formed by four models, and we chose two of those. And so the choice of this model was driven, well, first of all, practicality. The two coastwide models are a bit simpler from how the data are structured. So that was one of the reasons. They are a bit faster to run. So if you consider all the simulation that we have to run and the time that this simulation takes, every second counts. And so those two models actually perform in between 10 to 15 seconds in the streamlined version. So that's why we chose those. But yet, they retain the complexity and the uncertainty captured by the full stock assessment ensemble, because the short and the long coastwide model represent, for example, uncertainty in natural mortality rates, in environmental effect on recruitment, and so on. So the uncertainty of the ensemble is still retained, even though we're using only two. But for practicality reason, we had to choose some of the models. We couldn't use all four of them. So that's what we did. We have a framework, we have the code that does that, and so we run those two models, and we get the same quantities that Ian provides, and then is when the harvest rule is applied. And so basically the harvest rule is the application of the estimation model output to determine the mortality limits for the upcoming year or years. And as you know, it has a coastwide component, which is basically our SPR, and then the distribution component. We need to distribute this total mortality to a regulatory area level, because that's where how the fishery is managed. So before diving into how we foresee, let's say, the distribution procedure of the TCY, I just want you to remind of these figures. So we've been talking about that a bit already, but I just want to remind you of the difference between the management procedure and the objectives, so we don't confuse them. It's really important that we keep them separated. So as you know, you've seen this figure before, I'm sure. This is what we call the harvest control rule, and there are a number of components to it. So first of all, the axis. And so let's look at the axis, the y-axis, that represents the fishing intensity. So think about it that as you increase fishing intensity, you basically go up the axis. And fishing intensity is expressed in SPR. SPR stands for spawning potential ratio. So in an SPR concept, a very high fishing intensity is on the upper part of the y-axis. A very high fishing intensity corresponds to zero spawning potential. Basically, there are no fish that can spawn. But at a very low fishing intensity or no fishing intensity, you have the maximum spawning potential. So SPR is equal to 100%. On the other hand, on the x-axis, represent the stock status. So to the right is the unfished biomass. The 1 represents the unfished biomass, while to the left, the 0 represent no fish in the population. So it's no biomass at all. There is another element I want you to look at. And as you see, there are those reference points and control points, and those are labeled with 2 different colors. So in blue, you have the control point, which are defined by the management procedure, and in red, you have the reference point or biomass objectives, which are defined by the objectives. And I will go more into that in a second. So the height of the line of this harvest rule is the reference fishing intensity, which is also called input SPR or procedural SPR. So it's the condition where we normally would operate under, right? In a normal condition, when everything is fine, we would operate around this SPR that, according to the intersessional meeting, is now set to 43%. So before it was 46 and now it's 43%. So if the stock status falls below what we call a fishery trigger, then we would start decrease the fishing intensity, right? Until the stock status either recover, or if the stock status fall below a fishery limit, then we would basically close the fishery. And in the current situation, in the halibut interim management procedure, we are using a control rule of 30-20, so which means that our fishery trigger is at 30%, and the fishery limit is at 20%. As you can see in this plot, in this case, both our control point and reference point are at the same level, and the same for the trigger and the threshold. But this doesn't have to be the case. So, for example, if you remember, during the Coastwide MSC, you tested a control rule that was 25-10. So that means that with the control rule of 25-10, your trigger will actually be slightly to the left. So your ramp would start at a lower level of stock biomass. And your fishery limit as well would be at the left of your biomass objective, because your biomass objective was still at 20%. So you still didn't want to go lower to 20% biomass, but you were actually going to zero fishery only when the biomass was below 10%. So just to let you know that those two, let's say, those two elements don't need to be the same, and that's where the difference between the management procedure and the objectives comes in. As you can see, the target in this plot is to the right of your trigger, and that's what you actually want. As Adam mentioned as well, you want to be at the target, and you would be at the target 50% of the time, which means that sometime you will be below the target, sometime you will be above the target. So if this target is too close to the ramp, you probably enact the ramp quite often, and this might be something that you want to avoid. That's just a reminder of why it is important to distinguish between what the objectives are that have been defined and are different from the management procedures. So now we can actually dive into how we see the procedure for distributing the TCY. So as you can see, there are 4 steps. So not all these steps are necessary, in the sense that you could, from a coastwide level, you could go directly to a regulatory area level. So from point 1, you could go directly to point 3, or you could have an intermediate step and split the TCY to distribute the TCY to a biological region level. So The last step, on the other hand, is just a policy-based, and I will go more into detail of that. As you can see, step 1 to 3 have a science-based component and a management-derived component, and you'll see why. So let's start with the first required step. We need a coastwide target fishing intensity, which in this case is our SPR 43%. So we determine the coastwide total mortality, and this is the science-based part, because that's the assessment model, right? The assessment model provides us with the total mortality. And then we separate this total mortality into a O26, which is the actual TCY, and the U26 non-directed fishing discard mortality component. And that's the more management derived part of this first step. And then, optional, we could distribute the stock to a biological region level. And to do that, we could use the stock distribution estimated from the WPOE index. So we use our survey to distribute the stock to a biological region level. We can then further adjust this distribution to take into account other factors, still science-based. So, for example, we know that there are differences in productivity between two areas, so we might want to adjust the relative fishing intensity, or we know something about migration, and so we want to adjust the regional fishing intensity. And these are all science-based components. But then we might want, for example, to further adjust this regional allocation to account for other factors, which can be, I don't know, other economic factors or simply negotiation. So this is the more management derived component. And so the last step of this distribution of the TCY is moving the TCY to a regulatory area allocation level. So again, we can use the stock distribution, we can derive the stock distribution using proportion of the stock estimated from the WPOE index. So again, science-based, we use the survey, but then we can further adjust this distribution to this regulatory area allocation to consider for other factors. Again, can be economic factors or social factors, or again, negotiations. And this is the last step, and is required because we need to get to a regulatory area allocation. Finally, there is this kind of policy component of the harvest strategies, and this occurs as a final step, where here other objectives are considered, again, economic and social objectives or something else. And this policy component can actually implies a departure from the reference SPR. This might be, for example, a desired outcome. Okay, for this year, we are going to depart from our SPR 43 and use an SPR 40. Of course, when we do that, we should keep in mind that we might deviate from, well, we are actually deviating from the management procedure and the long-term management objectives. And this departure may result in some unpredictable longer-term outcomes. Okay, so this is how we think that the procedure for distributing the TCY should work. Let's go now into, just briefly, how the current interim management procedure harvest strategy policy looks like. So as you probably all remember, we have a scale component, that is the one we've been talking about. We have a coastwide assessment with a coastwide fishing intensity and the 30-20 control rule, which provide us with the total mortality. we divide the total mortality between a U26 component and the O26 component, which is actually our TCEY, and then we distribute this TCEY to regulatory areas. So our reference SPR is 42%. We have a 30-20 harvest control rule. And right now, for the distribution component, we use the estimates from the space-time model, O32 WPOE, for each IPHC regulatory area. And then we have a harvest rate adjustment. So Western area have a slightly lower harvest rate compared to Eastern area. And then the current interim procedure added a further adjustment to the distributed TCY in 2019, which I believe should go, yes, it should go until 2022. So it's a kind of a short-term agreement, which include a fixed 1.65 million pounds for IPHC regulatory area 2A, and an allocation for IPHC regulatory area 2B, which is based on stock distribution and a fixed percentage. So this is our interim management procedure. That's what we are operating under right now. But so let's see what MSAB015 has proposed. And I just want to point out that the definition of those management procedure that we decided to consider has actually taken quite a long time, has been part of a process. And for example, there has been specific elements that were requested for evaluation and that have been discussed and then have been put into those management procedures. So these specific elements are in particular the use of a constraint. So for example, the slow up, fast down, and the maximum change in the TCY. It was a request to consider the different relative harvest rate across IPHC regulatory areas or biological region. It was asked to consider distributing the TCY directly to IPHC regulatory areas, so from a coastwide level to a regulatory area levels without passing through, let's say, the biological region stage. It was asked to consider a fixed share concept for all or some IPHC regulatory areas, biological region, or management zones, with option to distribute the TCY to the areas without a fixed shares. And the determination of this share may be fixed or varying over time. And then finally, it was asked to evaluate to set a maximum fishing intensity defined by an SPR of 36% to act as a buffer when distributing the TCY to IPHC regulatory areas. So those were the elements that kind of guided the definition of the management procedure listed in table, well, both table 1 and table 2 of appendix 6 of the MSAB report. So you can find this set of management procedure, as I mentioned, in the MSAB014 report in Appendix 6. You have 2 tables. The tools considered within all these management procedure are survey estimates. So the survey estimate has been been a very important component in each one of those management procedure to distribute the TCY to both the regulatory area and the biological region level. Fishery dependent data such as trend in CPOE by biological region or regulatory area. And then some practical tools such as the relative harvest rate, for example. So having lower harvest rate in some region compared to other, or percentage allocation to IPHC regulatory area, or proportion of adopted TCY. So there are kind of those 3 tools that have been used in the management procedure proposed. So one common thing throughout all the management procedure is the coastwide TCY component. So all the management procedure use a reference SPR of 42% and a 30-20 harvest control rule. Some of the management procedure apply constraint. And in particular, as we've been noticing before, they apply the combination of a slow up, fast down, and a max change 15%. For distributing the TCY, the main tool has been the O32 stock distribution. Most of the management procedure distribute directly to regulatory areas. So I think there are only two that goes through the biological region step. Different management procedure test different relative harvest rate adjustments. So some get a lower harvest rate for Western areas, some other put an equal weight to most of the area. And then most of the management procedure have the interim adjustment for regulatory area 2A and 2B. So this is how the management procedure look like. These are the main tools used and the constraint used and so on. So just a quick recap of the constraints. What do they actually mean? So two constraints have been used in this management procedure proposed that are the max change both 15%, in which the total mortality is constrained to change no more than 15%, both ways, and then a slow up, fast down, in which the total mortality increases by 1/3 of the increase suggested by the harvest control rule, and decreases by half of the decrease suggested by the harvest control rule. There are some other constraints that were actually tested in the Coastwide MSC, which are the max change both 20%, so instead of 15% maximum change is a 20% maximum change, and the maximum change up 15%, so the constraint is applied only when the TCY increase. And then a slow up, full down, in which the total mortality increases by 1/3 of the increase suggested by the harvest control rule, but then it takes a full decrease that is suggested by the harvest control rule, and then a fixed mortality limits for a number of years, which I think it was tested for 3 years. So reviewing the TCY only every 3 years. So these are the constraints. The first two, the max change both and the slow up, fast down, are the ones that have actually been suggested in the management procedure proposed, so are actually being used in the management procedure proposed. So now I will just go through some consideration about the tools that I've just listed that have been used in the proposed management procedure, and I hope that this might help with the discussion and eventually the revision of the management procedure proposed. So first of all, I think all of the management procedure proposed, at least in the short list, they use the O32 stock distribution instead of the all sizes. However, the whole sizes stock distribution is largely composed of over 26 Pacific halibut due to the selectivity of the set line gear. So to use the all sizes would be more congruent with the actual TCY. So this is something to consider. Then again, most of the management procedure move directly from a coastwide total mortality to a regulatory area TCY. However, I just want you to remind you that the conservation objectives are at a biological region level. So it might not be the case, but what could happen is that you actually don't meet the objective at the biological region because you don't take into consideration that step. And this is something that will be evaluated, and it's something that we need to take into account. Then I think all of the management procedure use the interim adjustment. So if you remember the 1.65 pound fixed for 2A and the fixed percentage for 2B. And this may or may not limit yield in years when the stock biomass is very high. So for example, if you have a fixed value for the TCY, you want 1.65 million pounds. In years in which the stock biomass is high, you wouldn't actually use the extra TCY. And then if the stock status, on the other hand, is low, so in times of reduced productivity, you might not just be able to get your 1.65 million pounds. So this is also something that we should keep in mind. And then there is this discussion about constraints versus no constraints, and we've had the discussion quite a bit already this morning. A lot of the management procedure don't use any constraint. And again, if you remember from the results from the Coastwide MSC, we observed that there were a lot of trade-offs between catch stability and catch opportunities. So if you want more catch stability, you might give up a bit of catch opportunities, and vice versa. If you don't care about stability, you can just exploit. You can just get a bit more opportunities. However, the use of the constraint, both at the coastwide or at area level, might actually help satisfying all of the objectives. So again, the use of constraint is something that maybe you want to take into account a bit more in your management procedure. And then just a final consideration is that some of the management procedure can become very complex due to the combination of multiple elements, and in general, we do encourage to keep them simple as much as we can, because that will facilitate transparency in the overall process, and it just make it easier to understand. So yeah, that's all I've got, and we're open for questions. And sorry, I figured out I didn't have the camera on. Sorry.
Thank you, Piera. I see that we do have a question from Dan.
Yeah, just real quick, Piera. Thanks for the presentation. When we were talking about the Fmax concept, I noticed that you carried forward F36, which is one of the numbers we discussed at the October meeting, but we also looked at something a little more conservative that didn't take us so close to MSY all the time, of F40. Did you guys, and you guys were going to consider that if time was available. I just wondered if you had any follow-on thoughts on using the max at F40 or versus F46, or where we go from here.
So I guess we decided on the 36%. If I recall the discussion, that was because it was the lower limit that we'd consider acceptable, let's say. We surely can test something else. I mean, I guess this is up for discussion on what people feel comfortable with, and also based on the results that we will get. But I'm not sure if Alan has more comments on that.
Yeah, thanks, Piera. Thanks, Dan. We haven't put a whole lot of thought into that one quite yet, but I imagine the 36%, if I remember right, was put into the minutes of the MSAB015 report, and it was sort of a verbal agreement that we would investigate potential other limits like the 40%. So we'll think about that, and that might be something good to note in this report.
Okay, yeah, so, yeah, all right, that's helpful. So when we do talk about management procedures going forward, maybe we'll bookmark that one to discuss what the Fmax should be, and if there's an option or two we want to make sure we capture in the minutes this time. That sounds great, thanks.
I see Chuck and Peggy. Chuck first and then Peggy.
Yes, thanks. I suppose right now we're asked to recommend the use of the biological, moving through biological regions as being useful. And at this particular point in time, at this point in time in the meeting, I am a little uncomfortable in actually moving forward with a recommendation, which this PowerPoint is suggesting, and it is certainly in the document. So we can hear more why it's important to go to the biological region first. I mean, it's really apportioning at a larger scale, and then we're still trying to deal with it and find it probably going to be more constraining for even having the discussion down the line. I personally think at this time, adequate, maybe best is to move straight to the regulatory area discussions and bypass any biological regions. I just don't think it's valuable in this process. And that's it for right now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chuck. Peggy?
May I follow up on that real
sure.
quick, Carey?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Alan. Yeah.
Sorry to interject there, yeah, Chuck, I hear what you're saying. We've been having this discussion for a while. We've had this discussion with the SRB as well, and there may be reasons to go through the region first before distributing to the regulatory areas, and we can investigate and evaluate some of those outcomes with the MSE. But some of the reasons that we might want to go to a region first and distribute to a region first is the method of distribution. So for example, when using the survey 032, for example, the survey 032 is going to have probably a better, less uncertainty at the region level than at the regulatory area level. And the classic example on that one is regulatory area 2A. The survey can fluctuate quite a bit just due to the natural uncertainty in the survey of that regulatory area. But going to that region sort of buffers against some of that uncertainty, and then you might choose different ways to then allocate to the regulatory area from within that region. That's one reason, is the data that you're basing it on. Another reason you might want to go to the region first is just the biology of Pacific halibut, and that the concept that Pacific halibut within the summer during the fishery tend to move around within the region and not a lot between regions during that time. So it's a more natural size area for thinking about allocating or distributing the TCY on that broad level. But of course, we do have to get to the regulatory area eventually, and that's why we have it open right now for the two different methods where the region is optional. We may go through the region and we then can go to regulatory area directly or through region to get there. What I can try to do is remember some of the documents where we described some of the benefits of going to region first. It might have been in a MSAB015 document or a 14 document, or it was probably in an earlier one, but we've been having that discussion for a while. And we're open to investigating management procedures that do both. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Alan. Does that shall we move on to the next topic? Peggy?
Thanks, Carey, and thanks,
No,
Kiera.
the next topic.
That was a great presentation. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. On slide 20 of the presentation, I just had a clarifying question. The first bullet says 032 versus all sizes, and it occurred to me when I was reading this, I've seen this before, that we are, at least for some issues, looking at other data sets besides our survey to cover the smaller sizes, 0 to 26. And I wondered if this is something that we might consider later to look at the full stock of all sizes of halibut. Maybe not in this go round, but if any component of bycatch is going to be evaluated by the MSE, that would be an important thing to look at.
Sure, if I may just respond real quick. Yeah, I think the all sizes is an important concept to remember. It and mainly from a theoretical standpoint is that the survey, what is first of all meant by all sizes is what the survey sees. So it's not all sizes of halibut. It's probably not actually measuring much, or well, it's measuring what of some of the bycatch or the non-directed discard mortality is, but it's not measuring those, say, age 2 to 5-year-olds. The set line survey doesn't see a lot of fish less than age 6, I believe. But it's just, right now, there's a little bit of an inconsistency of distributing the TCY based on O32 versus distributing the TCY based on mostly O26. And as been noted in past MSAB meetings, there could be a reason to use O32 for various reasons of focusing more on the landed catch and taking into account some of the potential non-directed discard mortality in the different regions or regulatory areas. But it again is something that we're interested in investigating in the MSC to see what are the benefits of going to all sizes or not. Thanks.
Peggy, did you have a follow-up question to that?
I sort of do. When you say all sizes, you're looking at 26 and over, correct? In this context?
It's mostly O26. It's what the survey catches. And the survey catches mostly O26. I think it's, and Ian, feel free to chime in and correct me, it's 1 or 2% that I think is less than 26 inches from the survey. But it's a small percentage, but all sizes does include that, those occasional small under 26-inch fish that are caught.
Yeah, and that's in the context of the directed fishery. So I'm with you on that. I'm just
the all sizes only in a concept related to the fishery independent set line survey in how we analyze those data. The O26 in the, well, the TCY is actually all mortality other than the U26 component of non-directed discard mortality. So the TCY also does contain some U26 mortality as well. And this is a reminder, we have this discussion a lot, especially when we're in the office having the hallway discussions, that we need to really clear up these terms and make them a little bit more accurate, you might say.
Yeah, my question was really in the big picture of what we're evaluating and whether or not it would be productive to think about the other data sources, which of course Ian is familiar, you both, everyone there is familiar with them, that we're not using here. And I'm presuming that's because what we're looking at is the directed, we're looking at doing a management strategy evaluation of the directed fishery harvest control rule and harvest policy. So I'm sort of answering my own question, but I just wanted to clarify that even though we're talking about the full all sizes of the stock, we're really only talking about O26 and up.
That's mostly, yeah, that's correct for now. We're really focusing on that directed portion of the fishery. Okay. And here, all sizes in the set line survey refers to what is caught in the set line survey. When we do analyses and evaluations, we'll be showing potentially other, the smaller fish in the population modeling.
Okay, thank you.
Ian, did you have a follow-up to that?
Just to clarify that we're talking about purely the distribution step. Which of these different slices of the population are being used to define the distribution? We're still modeling all of the mortality in the MSE and in the assessment. So it's really just one single step. And it doesn't preclude us, any choice here doesn't preclude us from still investigating the effects of all the different sizes of mortality, both in the MSE and in all other analyses.
Thank you. So it looks like Jim had a comment next.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Chuck said. I'm not ready to recommend that bioregion is the way to go. I'm not saying don't evaluate it that way, but I'm not convinced. One of the reasons for bioregion is if one of the objectives, and it's been stated quite clearly from the Canadian side, is a national share. If you go to bioregions where you do that, now you don't have a national share, you have a share of a bioregion. That's not really what the objective is about. And also, I'm not sure you can characterize the fishery as being a summer fishery anymore, like it was 25, 30 years ago. In some areas, maybe way out west it is, but certainly in others, the fishery starts in the first or second week in March and goes to the first, second week of November. And that is, what market really drives a lot of, and Peggy can probably understand this more than I do, market kind of drives a lot of the, how much gets sort of fished in there to a certain degree. So to me, I think that's, I think the fishery is way more complex now, and movement, I'm all right if fish aren't moving around much in the summer, but there's this west to east migration overall. I don't think we can just not sort of, I don't know how you account for that. And by bioregion saying, well, we'll just do it in the summertime, but meantime, the rest of the year they're moving. So, or there's some movement, which we don't know about. So that makes it really challenging. So I'm just saying that to me, it's not a done deal that bioregion is the best way to go. And I'm not saying I'm closed-minded about that, but that for other reasons. So.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Can I just reply quickly to that? Yes, in the presentation, I'm suggesting that it might be the way to go, but I'm not saying that is the way to go. So I guess, evaluating and evaluating both situation and look at the results will actually tell us if going directly to regulatory area is perfectly fine, or if we might need these intermediate steps. So I'm not closing. I'm not close-minded about that either.
No, I understand that, right? But the Secretariat doesn't bring up ideas it doesn't think it wants to really flesh out and stuff, right? So they brought up the bioregions 2 or 3 years ago, and I'm just saying, okay, but like you said, we want to see some of these other things, and a bioregion may not, be appropriate for the type of management procedure that we'd like to see evaluated.
Sure.
Adam, it's Carey, it's Chris Bohr.
Is this directly related to this topic? We've got Dan has been waiting to speak as well. I don't know if he's speaking on.
Oh yeah, no, just put me on the list. Put me on the list. Thanks.
Okay, great, will do. Dan?
I just find myself agreeing with Jim and Chuck that, I think it's premature to have that as our recommendation at this point in the meeting, because we haven't seen the results that dictate that regions are the best one. And so, I guess, rather than spending a lot of time on our report writing on this, I'd be more comfortable if we wait to make a recommendation on region versus area until we've seen the results later this summer. And then in terms of the third bullet, that all the tools are to be considered are the ones that have listed, I'm not sure I'm ready to make that recommendation in our minutes until after our discussion under scope of program of work under number 7, and we see what those final options are or management procedures are we want to carry forward. The one that I noticed was not so far I could put my finger on what's been presented was the idea of a rolling average, where I think at the last meeting we had a couple of examples where you'd have a 3 or a 5 year moving average to find your shares based on the survey. Provide some stability across years and yet track major trends. And that seems to have gotten dropped out of this final table. And so I'm not ready to say that all the tools are on the table until I understand what happened to that one. So maybe we could hold this part of the report until after we have that discussion later on in our meeting.
Okay, so just bringing rolling averages back into the discussion. Chuck, I think you've been waiting to talk, and then Chris after that.
Yeah, thank you. I guess my topic is, or the question is on this 032 versus all sizes. And maybe I'm getting too much into the weeds or thinking too much on this, but this is a setline survey which determines our distribution, our coastwide distribution of the biomass, well, and the distribution later through apportionment. or new word distribution. Now we've moved from 032 to less than even 026. And I'm just wondering, how are we including the U26 then into what the set line survey is saying? And same with the 026, that actually can offset if the technically or available TAC then is increased, or the way of looking at the fish, is it possible that we are then technically offsetting mitigation on bycatch, be it U26 and 026 in any way? Or are we still only going to be discussing 032 when it comes to the distribution?
Piera or Alan, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. The use of what we were talking about here in the 032 versus the all sizes is simply what is used to determine the proportion of the stock in each regulatory area, for example. And that is then used, as you noted, in the distribution of the TCY to there, along with any other elements of that distribution procedure. So another thing to remember is that all sizes is referring to only the set line survey, which is a very small percentage of U26, and it's measuring the population of all sizes caught by that set line survey in each of those regulatory areas. This would not be in any way related to the mitigation for the U26 bycatch mortality. It's a separate concept of that, and it actually is not measuring much of the U26 that would be encountered by any of the bycatch fisheries in any regulatory area as well, since it's a hook and line, set line survey that mainly catches O26 fish. So yeah, I'd say where we're at in the MSC now is we're not addressing any of that bycatch issue, that mitigation issue in the MSC right now. That'll be a task further down the road once we get this done.
Okay, thanks. I'm still pondering, but thank you.
Okay, yeah, good.
I had actually a follow up on, oh, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Either way.
Chris, go ahead. I had a few clarifying points that I'll bring up afterwards.
Maybe if I hear your clarifying points, it might answer one of my questions. So why don't you go ahead, Adam, and then I'll ask.
Okay. It's a very Canadian standoff. No, after you. The question I had was the one for the group around 032 and all sizes distribution. The recommendations that came forward in October 2019 were that everyone was pretty content, it seemed, to talk about 032 distribution rather than all sizes, at least for the first suite of management procedures that the Secretariat was going to evaluate. And I'm curious to hear from MSAB members about why that was the case. Was it a matter of familiarity, or yeah, why were folks happy to talk about 032 distribution rather than all sizes? Was that a conscious decision or more a default? So that's a question for the group that maybe some folks could speak up to. The other question I had was a clarification about constraints, but maybe I will I'll wait until Chris has had his question asked. And then the third was the bioregions versus regulatory area piece, building off some of the comments earlier. I'm still unclear about the basis for that recommendation about why go to regions first. Alan mentioned 2 points. One was that the surveys have quite a bit of variability, and so if that's the distribution tool being used, it could result in quite a variable distribution. That seems reasonable, although you could maybe address it with something like a constraint. The second piece, though, is that it's maybe a more natural distribution, and it may help us, I guess, meet our conservation objectives for those regions. That I don't follow. I mean, we could distribute biomass based on the number of bananas in the grocery store, and then evaluate that way and see that it's not a very good procedure to meet our objective. But I was unclear on that justification, and maybe that clarification on why going to regions first is important could help folks put forward some advice, because so far from what we've heard from a number of folks is they're not comfortable yet recommending going to regions over regulatory areas. So that was a lot of questions. One was on this 032 versus all sizes. Like to hear from the group on that. The other was why going to bioregions first might help us better meet our conservation objectives.
I'm wondering if we should let Chris speak and then come back and tackle those questions one at a time.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Chris?
Well, my questions are kind of related to this discussion, so maybe we could just start that discussion. I mean, I guess I understand now some clarity over what 032 versus all sizes actually means. I wasn't clear on that, but I've got that now. But I guess, you know, we talked about 032, and that's what we presently use. And I guess the thing is, for distribution, then moving to all sizes, I think it's really trying to understand, okay, what are the implications of that? So I think that's why, you know, I have some questions about that. The other thing with respect to the, you know, I echo Dan's comments and others about looking at the recommendation. I'm not comfortable with it yet, or the tools until we have some further discussion. So I think we should hold on those. I mean, for me, for the question of moving for, you know, do we go to coastwide to regulatory area, or coastwide to region, or to then to regulatory area? I guess my thought was, well, isn't that what we're here testing? Isn't that what we're simulating? We're going to look at different management procedures and see how they meet the objectives. So I'm not sure. I'm not so comfortable with just without seeing some results and talking a little bit more on that.
Oh, okay, so that was related. We've also got one comment or a couple of questions from Anne Marie that are related. So I can relay Anne Marie's comments if that is okay, Anne Marie, and then perhaps we can consider those within the discussion of Adam's questions. So Anne Marie says, in regard to 032 versus all sizes, one question is landed catch mostly 032? And two, is most of the modeled catch mostly 032? If both answers are yes, then it seems like 032 makes sense. And so does the Secretariat perhaps want to comment on that quickly? Ian?
Looks like Ian has turned on his webcam. He might be
Yes.
good.
I saw you pop up and then I just thought you'd start speaking.
Sure, I'm just making sure I wasn't breaking the rules of etiquette here. There are several sources of mortality in the directed fishery that are 026 but U32. So there's a large fraction now of the recreational mortality, all the commercial discards, as well as subsistence. So there's plenty of mortality that occurs that's U32. In some regards, the use of 032 is a throwback to when basically everything under U32 was just ignored in all the calculations. And the reason this keeps coming up is because in 2010, when there was a transition made to include all the 026 components in what was then the FCEY, there was no similar transition made for stock distribution. And so we developed essentially just a logical inconsistency. It doesn't matter in terms of the MSE process, either or both can be tested. We're still including all that mortality in the various calculations. So it's not like we're doing what we used to do decades ago, which is actually ignore those sources of mortality. This is really just which kind of tool is going to be applied in the subsequent analysis. And I think it was Chris made the point that some of this just remains to be seen in the results. If one performs better than the other in the results, then we really don't need to spend a lot of time arguing about it.
Thank you, Ian. Shall we let Dan speak?
I I was just going to address Chris's comment on why 032 versus all sizes, if that's what we're talking about.
I think that's the next question anyway, so that's great.
I mean, my recollection of it is that it's tied to what the commercial size limit is now. That we did have an objective that's kind of been in the parking lot of minimizing wastage that we've never really pulled forward a whole lot, but it's been on the discussion quite a bit. And I think there's been 2 proposals in front of the commissioners to reduce the size limit from 32 to 26 that have not gotten traction. And so, you know, 032 seems like a reasonable option as long as there's a 32-inch size limit on the commercial catch in order to reduce wastage. And that's kind of where most of my interest has come from in seeing that carried forward. In terms of looking at 026 as well, I think that's fine. Like Chris said, you know, let's look at 1 or 2 examples of it and see, you know, how it contrasts. But I recall at the end of the October meeting, we're also really looking at ways to minimize the number of alternatives we're looking at. And so rather than duplicate every one of the management procedures as 032 versus 026, you know, I think the dominant interest was to maintain 032 until the size limit changes. But we can look at a scenario or 2 that looks at 026 just to inform us how distribution might change with that to look at, but kind of minimize the number of runs we do on 026 for time and efficiency. That's my recollection.
Thank you, Dan. Are there other comments?
I had a clarification on the constraints piece. I think, Pierre, the point you had made was that an acknowledgement that the constraints were not, when we discussed constraints, we didn't discuss them that much, both at the regulatory area and at the coastwide level. I think it's the next slide that was summarized. And so the discussion here was that maybe constraints at both regulatory area and coastwide would be helpful. My recollection in October, maybe it was in Sitka, was that there was some feeling that it may be redundant to have constraints at both levels. If they were, for example, if they were already at the regulatory area, they're not really necessary at coastwide. Now, are there some other interim results that have indicated it'd be helpful to have them at both, or is this more a hypothesis about how we could move forward?
No, I remember that we discussed that as well, if having constraint both at the coastwide level or at the regulatory area level and so on. But then in the management procedure proposed, they are only at the coastwide level. So that was just a reminder to people that, you know, it's something to think about, and it might not make any difference, and as you say, it might be redundant, but it's something they might be interested to explore, or is something that we might need to do if, you know, constraint on at the coastwide level actually is not enough to limit, for example, 15% change in some areas at the regulatory area level. So, it was just something to remember.
Well, that's helpful. Thanks very much.
Were those the 2 questions that you
on that
wanted?
point about the constraints real quick, just to follow up on Adam's comment. I think there might be also addressing 2 different sources of variability versus the coastwide versus the area. I mean, I think on the coastwide, you know, you have variability in the survey, but you also have variability in the recruitment estimates that affect the whole coastwide TAC. The 2012 year class is a great example on that. So you may want to have some constraint at the coastwide level to account for incoming year class uncertainty and the effect of that on SPR. And then you may need to have an additional constraint, or may not, at the area level to accommodate survey variability and changes. So I think we kept them both on the table because there might be more than one driver of variability, and we wanted to see if we had enough tools to address each of those.
Yes, thanks for that, Dan. I remember that conversation now. That's a good point, is that there's some different sources of variability that we might be trying to constrain. Good point.
Other comments, questions that Adam posed.
Adam, you had the question about bioregions versus regulatory areas, and why is going to regions first going to help us meet our conservation objectives And I just want to note that, first off, in related to that, we're interested in testing both approaches. One, going directly to regulatory areas, and second, going to regions. And I don't know which one will be better at meeting conservation objectives. Maybe it doesn't matter. But the conservation objectives are at the biological region level, and thus distributing to those biological regions is sort of a logical way to put together a management procedure if you wanted to meet that objective. But it doesn't necessarily need to. It's the same thing as putting a ramp or a target or a ramp somewhere because you don't want variability because you don't want to go below some threshold, but in fact you're trying to meet the objective of reducing the variability. You don't need to have the objective and the management procedure doing the exact same things. We can just make sure that we meet the objective by invoking some management procedure. So we're open to investigating both. Going to the regional level does sort of align with our hypothesis about the population, but as was noted, a lot of the fishing mortality is occurring outside the summertime when fish might be migrating across these regions to new regions. But I would note, under that hypothesis, that means that fishing mortality is occurring at different times in different regulatory areas when potentially fish are really moving around a region. So allocating to a regulatory area might just not make sense in general based on distribution at all, because distribution is based on a survey that occurs at a specific point in time, and fishing mortality occurs at a very different point in time with a different abundance of fish. So perhaps it's logical to distribute to a region and then use some other metric that's more aligned with when fishing mortality is occurring, CPUE or something like that, to allocate to the regulatory area. But I think, there's a lot of different reasons for putting these management procedures together. It's not an easy task. We have, we're trying to keep them to a minimum, yet we have a lot of ideas and things we want to investigate. So it's a really difficult task. And I think we've done a good job so far keeping it to a minimum, and we'll keep investigating and learning more as we go along.
Forrest.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we go to regions first before we go to area, and a region only qualifies for so much of the coastwide TCEY, and then we're talking about national shares for 2B, whose hide does that come out of if there's a regional step first? I mean, I'm always concerned that I'm not a proponent of national shares, and I've vocalized that before in our meetings, but I'm just really precautionary that I don't know enough to make sure that this doesn't happen. But if what 2B removals, if 2B removals and 2A removals are higher than what the survey suggests, if we look at it at a 2C region, area 2 region, is 2C going to be paying more of a price for that? And maybe those adjustments would be made in the management procedure using different, something different. But and hopefully I'm not seeing it right, but I do have a concern there. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Forrest. That's a really good point. And I think what we have to realize is that there are certain elements of the distribution management procedure that are not compatible with each other. And I think distributing to regions first and having a national share in 2B, or just some share to a specific regulatory area, those two concepts are not compatible. It would be a difficult way to work it, and I don't think that we could really find a really equitable way to make that happen. With that being said, we could get into more complex management procedures where, say, areas or regions 3 and 4 are allocated to, but 2C, 2B, and 2A are directly allocated to those, but I don't think we're in the place to get that complex right now. And so I think what we can do is just recognize that maybe some elements are not compatible with other. If we're going to national shares, that has to be distributing to regulatory areas directly.
So, Alan, that raises another point. Well, it reminds me of 2 points. One is this concept of management zones over regular or biological regions. So I don't know, like that hasn't really been discussed, and it reminds me of the second point that I was negligent to not acknowledge that Michelle Culver has resigned from MSAB. She's had another opportunity that's conflicted with this, but I can hear Michelle's voice in my head asking us to remember management zones as opposed to biological regions. And I realized I haven't really thought about where that's ended up in this process.
Yeah, just real quick, and Tom, I realize you're waiting in line there, but to answer that real quick, Adam, I think that is an example of where management zones might come in, and maybe that's where Michelle was thinking of it. I think management zones could be even extended into containing partial regions or partial regulatory areas, but I think that's starting to get really complicated when we have partial regulatory areas. We don't want to go there yet. My thought of that is there seems to be a lot of discussion right now about even region to regulatory area. Maybe that's a good first step to look at those two differences, and then as future steps, maybe we think about zones. Can we reconfigure regions or zones in sort of this distribution concept? And remember, what we're talking about here is just distributing the TCUI, the part of the management procedure itself. And keep that sort of on the back burner for now, and increase complexity as we start, you know, after this tool is fully developed and becomes more in production mode, and we can start investigating more and more and more and more.
Thanks, Alan. Shall we move to Tom? Tom, we can't hear you right now. Still can't hear you.
I think he needs to unmute his computer as well. I had that problem earlier. Unmute the phone and unmute the computer.
Okay, did you hear that, Tom? Unmute the phone and unmute the computer.
All right, let me go up and try to unmute.
There you go.
There we go. We can hear you now. Oh, hang on. Now we can't hear you.
He's on computer, I think. And he moved closer to his computer, we could hear him. I think he's on computer audio.
Okay.
Try now, Tom.
Maybe not.
Yeah.
It says
muted.
It says you're self-muted.
We still hear you.
We had you for a second.
We did have you for a second, though, so I don't know what happened. It doesn't look like you're muted on either your phone or the computer.
It says self-muted, so make sure your phone.
Yeah, I'll try, Tom.
Am I unmuted now?
There you go.
Yeah. Now you got it.
All right. In discussion with Bob Albertson in the past, he mentioned that the 2A and some of the regions on the edges have always had about a 25% variability, and that the central region is maybe 12 to 13% on the FISS. With the new changes now in with the spatial temporal model and the hook competition, and then going to bioregions, what has that variability been reduced to? Say, is it 5 or 6% now? Is it still 10 to 15? Or I mean, how have we tightened up versus the variability that used to be? I mean, that might help some of this discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. That's a good point. And Ian might want to correct me if I mischaracterize something here, but there's two types of uncertainty we can think about when, in relation to your question and comment there, Tom. One is the uncertainty associated with the estimate from the Fishery Independent Setline Survey for that particular year. And that is the uncertainty of you going out and you're sampling a smaller group of halibut, and you don't sample them perfectly. You don't take a census, and that's sort of that within year uncertainty. There's another type of uncertainty that's going to really have a large effect on our MSE results, and that's the uncertainty from year to year that is dependent on the timing of the survey, where the fish just happened to be when the survey came through, what the fish were eating. You know, there's a lot of different things that that result in a year-to-year uncertainty, and we capture that in terms of catchability in the stock assessment and changes in catchability from year to year. So I think with the spatiotemporal modeling of the survey, we're really addressing the uncertainty within the year, and that's really present in the data. And Dr. Ray Webster's done a fantastic job in getting that uncertainty to probably be as small as we can get it, squeezing as much out of the data as we can. But what we really can't control is that difference from year to year. You know, in 2A, there's a hypoxic event in 1 year, and that really changes the percentage of the biomass that's estimated in that year. Is that real or is that uncertain? A lot of work to still be done on that. That's something that we really can't capture as well with the spatiotemporal modeling. So given there's quite a bit of between year uncertainty, I think those areas with a small percentage of biomass, you know, a very small change in biomass for 2A is going to have probably a pretty big consequence on the percentage that's estimated to be in that region. So I don't know, I think it still holds that at the tails of this distribution, you're going to have a bit more variability in the percentage estimated than in the core areas where that percentage is probably a little bit more constant from year to year.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments? If there are not, I think we can turn it to, did you have another comment or did you want to?
No, I was thinking about how we wrap this up for something for the report. Is that right now?
Yes, that sounds good.
So I appreciate the amount of input that folks did have for this topic. This is the first really substantive item that we've had in our agenda. I'm glad that people were able to participate as much as they were. I think it was helpful to get some of the MSC's team's thoughts on how best to incorporate some of these tools in the evaluation. Although we did hear from folks a few times that with respect to the specific recommendation that the distribution framework consists of X, Y, and Z, that don't really feel comfortable putting forward a recommendation of these specific steps until they've had an opportunity to see some of the results. And I'm not sure where that leaves the MSE team in terms of what you'll do between now and the summer or whenever we have an opportunity to look at some of those results. So that's one thing I appreciate some feedback from Alan and all on. The other piece to flag is to identify some of the maybe missing tools or additional distribution considerations that folks have flagged. We heard incorporation of a rolling, I think it's the rolling averages of the estimated O32 or all sizes stock distribution. And then perhaps also some alternative to bioregions like management zones.
Adam, should I can I ask that first question real quick?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so in relation to the element or the actual methods here, what the MSE team is really looking for from the MSAB is agreement and recommendation that the framework, this distribution framework, be moved forward. And by that, I'm meaning what Pierre presented here in terms of, in terms of this framework itself, is that we're starting with the Coastwide you may distribute to the regions first and then to the regulatory areas, or you may go for coastwide to the regulatory area. And I think that is something, you know, that we've been working with that concept, and then we've been defining the elements that actually get you from coastwide to the regulatory area. And that's all that the MSE team really needs. So I don't see any problems with what we're working on now and what we're going to be working on this summer. As long as we have, you know, a table of what are the priority management procedures that the MSAB does really want to see in their evaluation, and we'll address that in the program of work agenda item and fleshing that out. And then also the MSE team benefits from the MSAB sort of list of tools or elements that the MSAB would like to see as part of these distribution procedures. And that's the things like the rolling averages. Make sure that's in the list, and if we want, put it at a priority level some way so that the MSE team knows how to best spend their time, which is not unlimited. There's limits to that, and that we can bring back what is, you know, desired by the MSAB.
So then, Alan, is it fair to say that when you're looking for an endorsement of the framework, it's more that the framework has the ability to facilitate distribution to regions, but that specific step could be skipped, and coastwide, TCE-wide could go right to regulatory areas if that is the desired procedure?
Yeah, I would say that that's a really good characterization of that, Adam, is that that there's that option there, and we may investigate it or evaluate it.
So then, given that, does that framework tie regulatory areas to those specific regions? Like, trying to see if this management zone concept would fit in anywhere. So if the framework were adopted as is seen on the screen right now, but then for some reason, you know, it was 2A and 2B within a management zone and 2C was lumped with 3A, would the framework be able to facilitate a new definition of region?
As currently drawn on the screen, no, but we could easily modify it to incorporate management zones as necessary.
Okay, that's helpful clarification for myself. Dan, I think you had a point on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just going back to the slide with the recommendation on it, you could. If Alan's looking for an endorsement of what he's calling the framework, I think a little wordsmithing to this recommendation is all it would take to give him that guidance. I mean, the problem is the first sentence that says consisting of coastwide TCE-wide distribution to biological regions and then distributed to IPHC regulatory areas. I mean, that really is saying we're recommending the region first, but you could say a distribution framework that allows either distribution to biological regions or directly to management area, and also considers relative fishing intensities, blah, blah, blah. And I'd be happy to support that type of recommendation. It's just wordsmith that paragraph and we're fine. I think on the terms of the third bullet, the tools, I think we can revisit that recommendation once we've gone through our Section 7, you know, list of management procedures, and everybody kind of identifies the ones that they really feel are important to carry forward. And at that point, we'll have all the tools on the table.
I think that's a really
How does that sound to folks? Did you? I missed what you said. I think we were talking at the same time, Adam.
Yeah, we were. I think Dan's suggestion of wordsmithing that recommendation will resolve the issue, at least as I've heard it. But I'd like to hear it from others. So are folks, is anyone concerned with the idea of the report containing a recommendation that endorses a distribution framework that is a bit, wordsmith a bit different than what we see on the screen right now, something along the lines of recommending a distribution framework that allows for a region distribution or distribution directly to regulatory areas?
I think I have one comment on that. I can let Chuck go first and then come back to me.
Well, okay, thanks. I guess in my case, I'd rather hear more as we through the rest of this meeting, whether it's today or whether it's tomorrow, and we'll come back to this recommendation. And if wordsmithing is going to do it, then fine. But I just don't know that I'm ready at this particular point.
I can see how that might be a good thing. My comment was that there is a concept that we're not evaluating as a management procedure right now, but that we've discussed before, that doesn't use this distribution framework, and that it doesn't consist of a coastwide TCEY that's been distributed, but rather the idea that you would use something like survey trend by regulatory area, and you would adjust the TCEY by regulatory area up or down just based on that survey trend. And of course, that could be applied at the level of biological region and then split out further also. But that idea is something that I think I'm still interested in seeing, as long as we're doing a management strategy evaluation where we have a model where we can just sort of see how that performs. And so that I'd like to find a way to keep that idea possible, and I think that's not consistent with this recommendation either. So whether we come back to that later on or discuss it further now, we've only got about 7 more minutes in our session today, but I just wanted to raise that point. So I suppose my proposal would be, as we move through the agenda, and we've got more agenda items, I think, having to do more specifically with the management procedures that we have on the table right now and the framework for investigation. My recommendation about this recommendation would be as for Chuck to come back to this later on in the meeting.
I think we can put some draft language in the report today and then remember to come back to it.
Sure, as long as the draft language can accommodate a management procedure that does not have a coastwide TCEY.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an important part, Carey. Thinking a little bit on it right now, I could understand the the need to make sure that we're not limiting ourselves too much by putting forward this recommendation early on. We haven't even seen results, let alone talked about other tools. So we can follow the approach we've used in the past where we've got something in yellow highlights. Yeah.
And maybe just put a comment on it, just saying this was the concern so that we remember what it was later on.
I think maybe the important part is for folks to, I think what's needed for this part is the secretariat, the MSC team needs some sort of guidance from, some sort of clearance from the MSAB to say, yeah, this is the framework that we want you to work within. And the MSAB is concerned that we don't want to, yes, we're willing to provide that recommendation, but we have to make sure the recommendation is broad enough that includes all of our considerations. So we'll have to find some kind of balance in between those.
Mm-hmm.
Adam, if I may comment real quick on that, is as a member of the MSC team, I see it slightly differently, and maybe I am confusing it by putting this or phrasing it in this way in that recommendation, is I don't think the MSC team would, if this was a recommendation, that we would see it as this is our boundaries, that we're bounded within that. We're definitely open and been thinking about alternative ways to do that. But in terms of if we're starting with a coastwide TCY and then distributing, we're looking more like the MSC or the MSAB is in agreement that this is an acceptable framework to investigate and evaluate moving forward with the MSC. We just want to make sure that we're not spending a lot of time on things that the MSAB is just a non-starter.
Yeah, I think that's good to understand, Alan. And at the same time, I think when we're doing report writing, we just need to be careful about how things will be interpreted by people in the future. But that's a good note.
Yeah, I'm particularly cognizant of that, given that this is a virtual meeting. I don't know if people are going to interpret things differently than if they were sitting in the room. I think for this meeting, it's more important than any other meeting that we've had to be really clear in our report about what we're saying. So I agree with where you're at there, Carey.
Yeah, well, and as a communication piece between the MSAB and the commissioners, being as clear as we can, I think is a good thing. So with that, it sounds like we've got a solution for today that will sort of highlight this recommendation in yellow and sort of note the pieces that we want to come back to or potentially wordsmith. And so in the next, we've got 2 more minutes, and I'm wondering if Adam, you want to just summarize what we've been over since the morning break.
Sure. Actually, I don't have too much more than what we've just gone over. It's largely seeing the presentation from the MSE team this morning, and the 2 key takeaways are how we identify this recommendation for the framework, and how we and whether there's additional tools that we want to identify to be included within that. It sounds like for both of those pieces, the MSAB would only feel comfortable putting a firm recommendation forward after we've had a chance to see some of the other agenda items that are planned for Tuesday and Wednesday. I guess the other piece is just to see if how folks want to kind of make use of this break time that's coming up. Do folks already have plans to kind of caucus during the break? Do people want to use this forum, or what else as co-chairs and secretariat can we do to support the MSAB members over the rest of the afternoon before we reconvene for report writing? Or have folks met their webinar capacity, as Jim pointed out earlier in the day?
It may also be that people looked at the schedule before today and made other plans for the 1 to 3 o'clock period. And so if we want to plan more conversations in sort of the unstructured period of the day later in the week, that might be more successful than today. People can kind of aim to keep that time free if they think that would be useful, but we could sort of let today go, noting that there may be other plans on the table. Peggy?
That's my situation right now. My kids are waiting for me outside the door.
Well, have fun with them, Alan. I envy you. I'm going to be available. I don't have any plans, specific plans, but there's tons of things going on. So I will check in again at 3 o'clock and be available if anyone else wants to discuss any of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Peggy.
This is Dan. I think the most valuable use of that kind of sidebar time is going to be after we've gone through agenda item 7, and actually see what are the management procedures that made list 2 from list 1, and what are some of the ideas out there. Like Carey just suggested a new one, and I suggested rolling averages, and I think we need to get to that part of our agenda as quick as we can, and then allow the space for people to have the discussions that firm up that next suite that Alan's really going to be running through the long simulations on. So I appreciate the idea of doing that. I would bookmark maybe Wednesday during this time to try and have gotten through that agenda item 7 and let people kind of caucus offline during that break to try and solidify ideas about what we want to move forward on.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, I'd agree with that point, Dan, too. And thinking of that, are there any suggestions that folks have with respect to the agenda and changing anything around? I spent a bit of time this morning at the break looking at it, and I to be honest, don't really have any silver bullet. I mean, one option is we could condense the agenda a little bit more, but that would make for a longer day, like more than just half a day of webinar. And I think productivity declines quite rapidly after that amount of time. Are there other suggestions about how we might make sure we've got a good chunk of time available to have the discussions that Dan was just alluding to? And if not, we'll stick with the agenda as it is. Maybe some folks can mull over during some of the unstructured time this afternoon and the evening.
Mm-hmm. I also think, you know, as the Secretariat noted earlier today, we may get through some sections faster than we thought, and that would also provide some of our structured time for more discussion. Yeah,
I almost wonder if we couldn't shoot for getting to agenda item 7 at the start of Wednesday morning and get through that and see what those ideas are before we break on Wednesday. I mean, Carey just offered one idea. I said rolling averages. Chuck has talked about adding a constraint to national shares. I mean, the sooner we as a group can put those thoughts on the table and then walk away and see, you know, how we're going to condense the management procedures in table 2 to continue on, I think that's the real constructive part of this meeting. And we'll take a little bit of soak time after we have that first discussion to be able to come back and start finalizing ideas.
Alan, can you just let us know how far, I'm realizing I don't understand how far we got in the agenda today. It looks like we got through 4.2, but then we did not also get through 5.1. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're exactly on the schedule.
Right.
Well, we're about 10 minutes behind right now, but no, we got through the management procedures part 4.2. We'd start 5.1 tomorrow. My suggestion is we take a look at the framework tomorrow. That'll be good just for understanding everything about the MSE and get that background again. And then we swap 6 and 7. We take 7 on Wednesday morning, as Dan suggested, and get through that. And the reason I'm suggesting that is the preliminary results presentation right now is not going to have a big effect on our decision making on the management procedures going forward after this meeting. And we'll have the chance to then review the entire report on after both 6 and 7. So if we swap 7, then do 6, we still have a chance, if anything does come up during then, to further modify the decisions made.
That sounds like a great plan to me, Alan.
And I think tomorrow might be, you know, a full day. Today, half of the day was taken up with administrative stuff. Tomorrow we have a full 4 hours for the framework, and we'll get through it for sure. And then we might be able to start having this discussion on the program of work tomorrow. But I think Wednesday morning will be good to, as Dan said, I like the term soak time.
Yeah, and also I like Dan's suggestion that Wednesday might be a good day to use unstructured time to have discussions on our own. So just keep that in mind, everybody. If you have that free, maybe keep it free so that can happen.
And I'm pretty sure the go-to meeting is scheduled basically all day long until probably 5 o'clock every day. So it'll be open, you know, as now we're a little bit over time anyway. So, but we have a lot of freedom in how to conduct this meeting.
Okay, a couple of other administrative pieces is for the report writing. We'll all come back on here at the drafting group, whomever shows up for that, will come back at is it 4 o'clock, 1600?
I thought it was 3. I think it's 3.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was 1500. You're right.
Yeah. So, and that's of course everybody is. It's a way to have a voice in what ends up in the report, and everybody is welcome to attend that who is an MSAB member.
So similar to past years, there's a a template that's started or will be started for us, and we'll fill out those pieces. I don't expect it to take the full hour, although I probably shouldn't have said it out loud. Don't jinx us. Mostly administrative items today, so it shouldn't be too much wordsmithing, given the one substantive piece is something we've already said we would highlight in yellow to come back to. One other administrative piece is just to confirm the, for those that maybe won't be back this afternoon, signing into the go-to session tomorrow morning. Will we get a new URL, Alan, or Secretariat staff, or do we use the same hyperlink today?
I'm pretty sure the link is the same. I sent one out this morning to all MSAB members, and that link should be constant for the entire week.
Okay, great, thanks.
So if you do get a reminder email from GoToWebinar or something like that, ignore that one and use the link of what was either sent out by Aaron last week or by myself this morning as a reminder.
Okay, great. Shall we wrap up? Any other points, Adam?
Nothing else from me, aside from a very heartfelt thank you to my wife and kids for keeping the house relatively quiet on this first webinar.
And thank you, Adam, and Alan, and all the rest of you who are faithfully attending this meeting while having kids run around the house. So we will see you all tomorrow morning at 9 then. And I hope everybody has, oh, no, we won't. We'll see you at 3. Well, I will see you tomorrow because I have another meeting this afternoon and I won't be at the report writing. But you all will see each other at 3 and for a short report writing session, and then we'll reconvene at 9 tomorrow morning. So thanks very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carey.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, Adam.
Thank you. Yeah, all right. Bye-bye.